Hashtag TD or hashtag ABR as we started up in the lower finals here between Team D and Abrakeydabra.
Let's get it rolling here. Final day of the MDI LAN final here in Sydney. Both teams, of course, stealthing right away and getting straight over to that first boss's room in the Golden Serpent area. A bit slow on the side of Team D right now. I'm not sure what took them so long. Nonetheless, they have crept by those first two constructs, Zyro.
Yeah, something really important to note here is this is the first time we've seen King's Rest this entire tournament so far. So neither of these teams have had a chance to look at the other team's strategies and picking and glean their favorite strategies from other teams. So these are all homegrown strategies. This is all stuff that they have practiced and prepared for this tournament. I want to see whether or not they're going to pull off this massive pull here in the first room. Both teams look like they're doing it.
Both teams look like they're doing it. A bit of a slip up there with some of the Sanguine on the side of Abrakeydabra. Kept those first mobs in for just a bit, but Bloodlust committed on both sides right now. This is a hugely dangerous pull. The tank can get gibbed at any second. You see Long taking absolutely no chances as he immediately heroic leaps out and starts to line of sight, making sure that none of those casters leak any of those ice casts on him. Abrakeydabra following suit right now as Divine Field does the exact same thing in the exact same spot. Doesn't really line of sight for too long though, as he just goes to the back of the room, wants to make sure that all of the mobs are trailing and dropping Sanguine so that they don't get healed too much from that Panini.
It looks like so far Team D is doing a much better job of kiting the trash down. They've got so much more of the trash dead. They only have 3 trash mobs left, while Abrakeydabra still has almost all of the trash pack left. Even if it's all sub 10%, it can still all do damage, and they still have to make sure they're dropping that Sanguine well. If any of these start casting and Sanguine, they're going to heal up quickly.
Absolutely fantastic start here from Team D right now as the first Reaping Pack plagues the team. We see the boss spawning here, a little trip around the golden pool in the middle, and they'll get started right away on this very dangerous Tyrannical boss right now. Long grabs the boss immediately, making sure to dodge all the shadow smashes on the ground as Abrakeydabra still just getting ready and finishing up on the last mob here. They actually missed one of the champions on the side right now that's enraged, but they have nonetheless spawned their Reaping Pack on top of it. The boss still has not come into play as Team D is already at 90% on Zyro. It is probably one of the most dangerous bosses in the entire dungeon.
Yeah, we mentioned it before the cast, that spit gold debuff. Whenever you see that golden debuff on one of the players in the top health bars in the room, every single time that debuff ticks, you're going to see their health chunk down 50-60%. And if either of the rogues don't have their cheat death, or if they don't have any other personal cooldowns, they could definitely go down. Their healer's going to have to pump single target heals into them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge chunky amount of damage. You can see the debuff right now on Ab. One tick doing about 40 to 50% of his overall damage, and making sure that they drop them usually as close together as possible, but there's a bit of uncoordinated drops here as the two animated golds are quite separated. If these reach the boss, as mentioned, it will put a huge absorb on the boss and give him a damage increase during it. Quite essentially a wipe at that point, but Abrakeydabra has finally gotten started, but they're a good 12% behind. And the boss actually does absorb one of the pools right now, as we just mentioned. They completely misplayed that and did not slow or CC or even kill these blobs that have absolutely no health almost, Zyro.
They literally have 30k HP. One dispatch, one pistol shot from the rogues should take that down. All they have to do is swap to it. That's just extreme laziness, and their entire advantage of pulling the room cleanly there is just gone. They're neck and neck on the boss now.
Yeah, they're neck and neck on the boss now. What a waste, and they probably have to commit some extra CDs to that. We see a Tree of Life pop there by Ab on the side right now. What an absolute waste for Team D. They have squandered their lead right now, and Abrakeydabra is right on their heels. They are 58% apiece right now, and likely Abra is in a better position in terms of personal CDs because during that boss's absorb, it deals increased damage. So the Spit Gold debuff that goes out on the player on Yushen in that regard was taking for a tremendously larger amount of damage. So they had to probably commit an Iron Bark at least.
And they did actually end up having one of the rogues cheat death too. Mog does no longer have that cheat death available to him, so if he gets one of those spit gold debuffs later in the fight, he won't have that available at all.
Not to harp on it too much. That was a very bad play, but I'm kind of shocked and impressed that they recovered from that. Usually we tout that as pretty much a wipe at that point. You have so much health to chew through, and oftentimes somebody dies. So good on them for keeping it up and just keeping it going. They are just slightly ahead of Abrakeydabra right now, 1 to 2% on the bosses. Abrakeydabra is trying to keep their Golden Serpent as stationary as possible so that the blobs come in from the same position at all times, and you don't risk blobs coming in from the other side of the pool in the middle.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the main thing to harp on here is just the pure single target healing. Neither of the healers are really having any issue with their mana. We've definitely seen, like for instance, when we had the Tyrannical Quaking week, I believe in Cup 2 of the Eastern Cup last time around, the Quaking damage on top of the Spit Gold would almost, insta-give players. But because we don't have any of those super nasty damage debuffs going off here, this shouldn't be too difficult for them to get through.
Shouldn't be too difficult right now as the Golden Serpent hits 15% apiece for the two teams, both sitting pretty at 22% trash, as is expected. This dungeon, of course, really not too many options in terms of trash skipping. You'll see a couple, especially with the constructs in some of the bridges, but you just don't have the option to skip too much trash. There's not enough count in this dungeon compared to something like Underrot, where you skip about half of the dungeon's worth of trash. Golden Serpent 7% here for Team D, and right on their heels is Abrakeydabra hitting their 7%.
Yeah, and this is going to go down, probably within 5 seconds of each other. That we can't keep harping on it enough. That one slip up there definitely cost them 15 to 20 seconds of time. So all of the advantage they garnered from doing the trash wall in the first room is completely gone. The only one thing that Abrakeydabra didn't do very well is they didn't do a good job of killing all the trash at the same time. So they do have that one lost soul that's going to spawn with the next reaping wave. But other than that, they're pretty much neck and neck here.
Yeah, lost soul. Basically, a mistake from both teams has evened out the playfield right now. Sloppy handling on the trash for Abrakeydabra, along with the Sanguine, and of course the sloppy boss performance for Team D. But we can already see these two Guardians, the Colossi that they skipped earlier with the mass stealth, are now pulled by the two healers as the rest of the team has gotten this gauntlet started. This gauntlet is usually particularly dangerous, and it isn't a set rotation for the purposes of the tournament. Of course, on live, we do know that it is a random rotation, but not really too bad in a fortified setting, and I'm liking what I'm seeing from the two teams here. They are keeping the constructs and the first set of the gauntlet on the outside. Usually you fight them in the room. The reason for this is you want to spawn those first Sanguine pools on the outside just so you have more space to work in.
Yeah, just definitely smart play from them. It shows that even though this is the first time we've seen it in the tournament, they're still practice with the Sanguine strategy in this dungeon, so I like to see that. Sometimes when you get to the later part of the dungeon, like we were talking to Method NA yesterday, and we're asking them how they felt in their series coming up. It's like, oh yeah, we've never practiced Waycrest Manor. These teams have definitely at some point practiced King's Rest. I'm not sure what you're showing there. What would you see?
I just think you look very nice today, Zara. No, what I saw was one of the constructs on the side of Abrakeydabra was casting his frontal and sitting in Sanguine, bathing in it, so it just healed back up 15%, back to maximum health of 100%. So once again, sloppy handling of Sanguine by Abrakeydabra loses them a few seconds as Team D handling it quite well on the side.
Yeah, they did the same thing in the room. When I was talking about their sloppy movement, one of those vigilant, the warrior, the champions, it was casting its vigilant defense, that frontal shield, in a Sanguine pool. They didn't have a knockback for it, so they weren't able, their Sanguine, their ability to deal with Sanguine has been a lot worse than Team D's so far in the dungeon, and they're going to have to, kind of clean it up moving forward.
And we saw it right there. As soon as a Sanguine pool came down on the side of Team D, immediate Typhoon from Ab just to make sure it bumps. He bumped it right out of the pool, so everything is very well done by them. They killed one of the Guardians a bit earlier just to get some of that heat off and some of the immobility of those mobs off, but a bit of damage coming in on the side of Team D right now as the second Reaping Wave crowds into the room at 41% right now. Both teams have actually spawned it indeed, so they have to make sure to dance around the frontal from the remaining Guardian, which has now gone down on both sides. Reaping, not really anything too dangerous within this room. There's really minimal mob count, and you have plenty of space because of the good handling of Sanguine to move around from the Shadow Smashes from the Lost Souls.
Yeah, Reaping at this point, none of the affixes are particularly dangerous. It's not even fortified, so the Reaping doesn't have that extra HP that it would have from the fortified mobs having extra HP. The only really thing they have to worry about is Volcanic, and since they're both running these triple melee comps, they can always constantly move while being able to dodge Volcanic, so that's kind of a non-affix, so to say, in this dungeon.
It's a non-affix, and oftentimes they're in the dead zone of the Volcanic spawn too, so they really shouldn't be getting too many. A lot of damage coming in on Baby Pig, though, right now, as he sat in the Bladestorm from one of the Kings on the side. Deals a tremendous amount of damage, certainly a very melee-unfriendly mechanic there, and it is probably the most dangerous of the Kings present in this room right now, but no proc for his cheat death right now, so he got out just after one tick and everything was all right. Finally, the Queen goes down right now as they move over to the last part of the gauntlet, something that Abrakeydabra is already on and well ahead on.
Yeah, it looks like while the Reaping was spawned, Abrakeydabra just kind of passively cleaved the Reaping down, instead choosing to focus on the Queen and the King so they could move on further into the trash, and they're completely done once this Queen goes down here. If they are able to get it out of the Sanguine, just barely they are. That was it could have been really dangerous there.
She did get actually a couple takes off, and she finally managed to move at the end, so once again, just a bit of time lost, but because of their higher DPS prowess, at least what they've shown so far, they have managed to boost just a bit ahead of Team D right now, sitting at 52% trash, and they will be moving on past the construct. Of course, this construct very typically skipped here with the mass stealth, as we're seeing from the side of Abrakeydabra, into what is otherwise usually a fairly large pull in the room, and there's really nothing preventing them from doing this pull as long as they move well, once again, with the Sanguine from all the ooey gooey rich and chewies in the room.
Yeah, and we keep talking about it. We talked about it yesterday. We've talked about it in previous MDIs. Divine Field's one of the best tanks when it comes to kiting things around, making sure they don't, get too much Sanguine drop in the same time. We saw him do it in Freehold as well. He's generally pretty good at it. It looks like they've had a little bit of nerves in this dungeon so far, making sure they're kiting trash around, but he's generally one of the best tanks in my opinion when it comes to kiting mobs around, and you can see the way he's kind of moving around the room here.
Yeah, it's going quite nicely here. They have to be careful. Machimba, of course, the boss, is just on the bottom part of the screen there for Abrakeydabra, and has quite a large aggro radius, so you have pretty limited space to kite around right now as the blobs do start dying, and the team is doing well to avoid all the poison on the side. Excellent job here by Abrakeydabra. This is what you expect to see from the teams, and they swoop right back in near the tombs once the Entomb cast comes out of the constructs so that you can spam click that sarcophagus immediately and release your buddies. Team D has made up a bit of time actually compared to how behind they were in the gauntlet, relatively of course how behind they were in the gauntlet. They've killed most of the ooey gooeys in there and are dealt with the constructs. However, one construct is very high health compared to the other one.
Yeah, and something I want to point out here, one of the things Divinefield did that Long did not do is he made sure that he kept everything on the exact same half of the room. That way, whenever the Entomb cast from the Interment constructs went off, they always went on the same side of the room. On the side of Team D, they actually kited from the right side of the room to the left side of the room. So not only did they have the Entomb on a different side of the room, their healer had to run all the way over to get the person out of the tomb. So that was just like not very well done from them. And as a result of that, Abrakeydabra is 25% ahead on the boss now.
Yeah, 25% on the boss. Team D only spawning the third Reaping Wave. It's generally okay. It doesn't matter which side of the room you want to deal with those two constructs, but just don't sit in the middle of the room because you're going to have to run to one side or the other. So going from right to left or just sitting on the right, it does not matter, but just commit to a side, unlike what Team D did. So definitely losing a bit of time there as once again the Reaping plaguing Long. He actually procs this cheat death trinket there. Machimba, definitely the hardest hitting boss in this dungeon. Actually, maybe of most of the bosses in the Battle for Azeroth dungeons, just to absolutely demolish his tanks with his melee right now, especially in this tyrannical environment. So Long had a bit of a proc there on the cheat death trinket, not going to have that available again for 6 minutes just because of the increased damage, not only from the boss, but these Reaping Soul stacks coming from the Reaping Souls.
Yeah, and the thing to mention here, which is pretty cool, is Abrakeydabra is really focusing on their single target damage right now. They're just focusing everything on single target. They're not cleaving things down. They're making sure that the priority targets that will get them further into the dungeon are the things that are dying first. That's why they're doing such a good job staying ahead of Team D here. Now, of course, Machimba, it pretty much does the same thing that the Interment constructs does. The main thing being that when it entombs someone, it can be in one of any of the 4 tombs around the room. So you'll see people kind of spread out when the Entomb cast comes, just so they can make sure they get the person out right away.
Yeah, good kiting here. Good kiting here from, of course, the fire zones, the area denial that Machimba does on the floor. It does target one of the players. As we can see, they are doing a very good job keeping close to the zones that have already dropped, is not to cut the room in half, so that once the Entomb mechanic comes up, as Zyro did mention, they do have the space to run to either side of the room. Something that Team D's done slightly more sloppy, but they still put most of their fire zones in the corners and sides of the room. But you certainly don't want to cut off that middle area just too much yet. Team D and Abrakeydabra both sitting at 65%. And, you know, Zyro, at least during the season in this dungeon, one thing that we often talked about is where do you commit your bloodlust? We saw kind of a 50-50 split throughout the 6 weeks of the Cup, where some teams would commit their bloodlust on the boss here and really not gain too much out of it, especially in this tyrannical environment, and some would commit it for the trash afterwards. But again, not really getting too much out of it, but certainly getting a lot more safety out of it. And it looks like both of these teams are committing to the trash tactic.
Yeah, definitely a safety strategy, which is kind of questionable considering almost none of the affixes in the dungeon make the trash do more damage. But when you do that double spectral berserker pull coming out later after this, your tank can go down just at the snap of a finger. So just maybe playing the safer route. I don't know if I like that in a speedrun dungeon, especially when we're in the top 4 of the tournament, where this has BlizzCon ramifications here if Team D wins or loses. So I don't know if I like the safe play from the teams here, but they're going to have the third bloodlust later on in the dungeon either way, so it's not too big of a difference, I don't think.
Not too big of a difference, as Machimba is now at 11% for Team D. Indeed, Abrakeydabra there maintained their 25-ish% boss lead the entire time, but Ashine proccing his cheat death right now on the side of Abrakeydabra. Here comes that very dangerous pull. There's 2 stacks of bleed from the Spectral Berserkers on Divinefield right now. Their bloodlust is halfway done, and he starts kiting away just to get a bit of distance from them in safety as the Healing Tide Totem drops down from the Witch Doctor, and he manages to unluckily get the Frost Shock on him as well. But they do manage to spread them out and Ring of Peace all of the mobs out of the Sanguine. It looks like they're pretty stable right now as another bleed goes down on Jay, who I believe immediately Dwarf formed it off because it was active for only just a second. So Dwarf Rogues really pay off in this dungeon.
This Berserker is just sitting in Sanguine pools right now. It's healed almost to half HP, 2/3 HP just from sitting in Sanguine pools. Actually doesn't have his cheat death available as he drops incredibly low there. This is not a clean pull from them at all. They're having to almost kill an entire extra Spectral Berserker Berserker here.
Yeah, and Divine Field gets one more bleed stack on him. Elserat can only sustain this level healing for so long. That Tree of Life is already down right now. Finally, the final take of bleed ends up taking off of Divine Field right now, as Team D is doing a similar pull and gets the Ring of Peace somewhat defensively for long as he kites down the stairs right now, but he's at 13%. He doesn't have his cheat death drink, and he does go down. Ab immediately battle resing him on the stairs, but we're going to have aggro left and right here. Long is not able to AoE taunt all these mobs, so the team's going to have to play extremely defensively. Baby Pig getting the bleed on him, immediately Dwarf forms it off, and another bleed going from the Spectral Berserker onto Mog as well. The team is kiting down the stairs right now and helping Logging at aggro, but a Frost Shot goes out on Yushang, and one more hit finishes him off too. They do have a battle res available, but are not committing to it just yet. Finally, it comes up here from Ab, and the team looks like they're stabilizing here as Abrakeydabra has already moved over to the Brute.
Yeah, they just have that one Berserker left. It might get one more bleed off, but it looks like at this point, with only 2 mobs alive, they should be just fine. They should be stabilized. But because of the danger of that pull, because they were not clean, Abrakeydabra has been able to move on and proc their 4th Reaping Wave. They're just pretty significantly ahead at this point. One full trash pack ahead in a dungeon like this, when it's on rails, when there's not really that much variability in what you can pull, that's a lot.
That's a lot, and it looks like Abrakeydabra is committing to just skipping the entirety of the hall right now as Divine Field rushes through with his Swiftness Potion, just gets a spot aggro on everything, gets some stuns, gets an Intimidating Shout out, and then everybody Shadow Melts at the bottom of the stairs while Team D is still dealing with the Spectral Brute and trying to spawn their next round of Reaping. Both rogues sitting not too pretty right now on health for Team D.
Yeah, and they actually do have one of the Spectral Berserkers here on this boss. This could be a lot of tank damage. I'm not sure if I like this strategy. It's very, very dangerous, I feel like. But the Cool of the Butcher bleed plus one of those Berserker bleeds could just be an instant death for someone.
But you know, Zara, I mean, we just talked about it. Safe is not always the strategy, especially in a tournament of this caliber. Not only is a BlizzCon spot on the line, but the top prize of $50,000 for the team. So they're just they're doing with what they can. I'm sure they've practiced this before, I would hope. But it is going to be a lot of damage on the team, as unfortunately Elserat is the one that gets the Sever Axe bleed, and not one of the rogues that can dwarf it off, or Divine Field himself taking down to 9%, and another bleed coming in from that Berserker. Elserat just having so much trouble right now, healing everything up. Divine Field barely hanging on, decides to Shield Wall and Heroic Leap out of the group right now, so Elstrat can focus on himself with that Sever Axe debuff. Divine Field now starting to stabilize just a bit.
Dr. J just got the Spectral Berserker bleed, and he committed to using his Stone Form on that, so he will not have that for any of the bleeds that Kula the Butcher puts out at this point, so we'll have to keep an eye on if that's bad for him in the future. If he gets that bleed debuff from Kula, he doesn't have any way of getting rid of it, and Elserat's going to have to heal through that.
Yeah, they just have to be careful, of course, with that Sanguini pool near the boss. Now, these bosses are largely mobile, and of course, you already premeditate and pre-control where you place them, so really shouldn't be too much concern for that pool on the side, especially by the time to get to the 3rd boss. Yushang dipping quite low here on the side of Team D right now, just barely getting healed back above 20% as they finish off most of the mobs in their 4th Reaping Wave, sitting at 88% trash right now, 4% above Abrakeydabra, who is getting close to finishing the first boss of this 3-boss council here.
Yeah, it looks like they were able to get the last Severing Axe there on one of the rogues, and he was able to Stone Form, and I think Ashine got that one, so good for them. They might get one last one with Cool the Butcher at 5% here. They might get that final one, but I believe if you vanish in between bosses, you actually drop boss combat, and you can get rid of that debuff. So yeah, they don't get the last debuff, but that was definitely dangerous from them. They're able to pull it off with no deaths, so definitely, it worked out for them.
And if I'm not mistaken, they still have a Spectral Berserker CC'd on the side because they've decided to pull the 2 Berserker pull pre-boss, deal with one of them during the boss, and then kind of just crowd control the other until they deem it necessary to start dealing with it, which is not right now, as it says blinded in the corner. Team D going for a more traditional routing, if you will, where they get all of their trash done before the 3rd boss. I know they're missing 4%, but that will, of course, come in the form of the Shadow of Zul, and they rush over and start their boss encounter as well.
Yeah, of course, we haven't really talked too much about this council fight so far. So pretty much the way the fight works is each of these 3 bosses has their own special ability. We see them dealing with Xana's All the Wise's main ability, where she summons 4 totems throughout the room. You need to kill the explosive totem right away, and then you can kind of cleave down the other 3 right after that. Of course, the main mechanic of the fight is that when you kill a boss, it will always come back to life, periodically and do its main ability. So even though they've killed Cool the Butcher will still respawn and spawn those Severing Axes you see going around the room.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly don't go away. They're like that annoying friend that just always wants to do what you're doing next, and you can never get rid of them, just like Jack. We know our good friend Jack. But the Xanal the Wise here at 38% right now for Abrakeydabra. Team D, starting to look nice and solid, getting back on board with the boss here. 50% on Kula. We do know the bosses are in a premeditated order. However, keep in mind, Abrakeydabra still has 14% trash to make up, 12% trash to make up to the 96 before moving on to the Shadow of Zul. So they're not as ahead on the boss as it looks right now. Doing well to stomp all the totems out. The Torrent totems, not too much of a concern. Earthwall is certainly second priority after that explosive totem because it constantly pulses and absorb on the boss, just sinking a huge amount of DPS that it should not be required on the boss. So they move over to the Thundering and the Torrent totem. Like I said, not too much of concern because you can already see they actually left 2 Torrent totems up. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, all you have to do with the Torrent totem is just dodge these blue swirls on the ground, which you might think might be really annoying for these players, but since they're all playing melee, they can just keep doing all of their damage on the move, and they'll just kind of go and cleave one of those Torrent totems down. The other one, unfortunately, they have on top of the Berserker, so they're probably not going to be killing that one until they choose to deal with the Berserker.
Aka Ali is the final boss of the 3 here that has spawned. It's the tank moderately hard. The main mechanic here, of course, is this barrel through that will target one of the players, and upon completion, will do a mass amount of damage, split evenly by the amount of players that soak the charge to the last player. Now, the trick here is that by the end of the barrel through, if you vanish it or shadow meld or drop combat in one way, it will actually start to recast it on another player. Once the cast is successful, she will do a debilitating backhand on the tank that if it lands successfully, will give you a 10-second massive armor debuff, so the tank kind of runs around in circles during that period just to make sure you don't get smacked too hard.
Yeah, and actually, I like this. Abrakeydabra was able to pull off what I kind of call the Team D strategy, where they were able to vanish enough of the barrel throughs in a row to where it actually just queued a debilitating backhand and then started to barrel through afterwards, so that the tank could just stay in and do as much damage as he wanted to do the entire time instead of having to kite around. So that just bought them quite a bit of extra damage there for their tank. And we're going to have to see what they plan on doing with that Berserker there. They could actually leave it there and then shadow meld the combat off later if they choose to do that with maybe shadow melding the 5th Reaping Wave, but it wouldn't surprise me to see them pull it into another pack and kind of cleave it down.
Yeah, perhaps so. I mean, look, they have to make that 12% trash somewhere before they move over to the Shadow of Zool, the final trash mob of the dungeon. And it's a non-fortified environment. We're in a tyrannical environment here. So as dangerous as that mob is, they should be able to chew through it pretty quickly as the 3rd boss finally does go down. And Zyra, as you mentioned, they do decide to leave that Berserker there on the side. We'll see what they decide to pull. Frankly, they'll have to pull most of what's on the bridge right now. They need the raw percentage. Aka Ali has spawned here for Team D at 85%. Keep in mind, as soon as this final boss dies for Team D, they're just going to mass stealth and head over to the Shadow of Zool right away.
They're not, well, okay, I was going to say they're not pulling any of the trash here, but they did end up pulling all of it, actually. It looked like they weren't trying to, but they did kind of clean it up and get everything stacked on top of each other very cleanly, so maybe this was planned. It looked like they were trying to go through the gate without pulling anything there, if I'm not mistaken. But if this adds up to exactly 12% of trash, this was definitely planned for them.
I mean, it is planned. We have a double blind on the side there from the 2 rogues right now, so it looks like this is exactly the amount of trash that they still require. A bit of damage coming in on Divine Field from those Spectral Berserker bleeds, but nothing too bad right now. Unfortunately, they're not getting to move out of these healing totems very quickly, the healing tide totems that go down, and they just get so much pulsing on the group.
The Beastmaster is just standing in Sanguine. It's been standing in it this entire time. It's healing completely to full from half HP, and that's not a mob you want to heal to full. That Poison Barrage, if you don't vanish it, that's Jay goes down to it. That's just a lot of damage. That could have been avoided if they had some sort of displacement, but because it's in that corner there, they couldn't have displaced it unless they had a ring of peace in the corner, but they used it for something else.
This is just really sloppy play right now, and the Hunter comes in, and Elsarat actually gets punted into the pack beside him and goes down. No battle rest for him. They do have their checkpoint at the 3rd boss here, and he immediately gets in cat form stealth and runs over to try and help the rest of the group out right now. 2 sloppy deaths on the board here for Abrakeydabra for a Team D that's just rifling through the rest of the boss and moving up to the Shadow of Zool now. Dr. J chunking below half. Poison Barrage on the entire group except for Swagfist. Only has 1 Dispel from the Monk and 1 from Elsarat. The remaining 2 members will have to eat 8 seconds of that dot. Ashine getting so low right now, but finally managed to get rid of the dot. Really sloppy play here as Team D is now ahead and has started on Shadow of Zool because of that hiccup from Abrakeydabra.
That Sanguine Pool just cost them probably 45 seconds of time. Elsarat, now,
it's not the first time, Zyra.
It's not.
This is like the 4th, 5th time we've seen him misplay with Sanguine.
True. I mean, credit to Elsarat, though. He did pull that extra pack, and instead of, making it worse and running back to the group, getting everyone in combat, he just instantly died. He ran backwards into the trash pack. I want to give him credit and say he died on purpose because he knew that they would give aggro.
Doing what he does best, right?
Yeah, but it could have been a lot worse than it was. It was kind of, I want to say it was a heads-up play from him there, but, he could have just gone down accidentally, too.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, you say it's good that he sat there and died, but he died in about half a second, so I don't think he even made a very conscious decision about what would happen. Nonetheless, Team D here has popped Tree of Life. Ab has popped Tree of Life on the side of Team D right now, finishing up the rest of Shadow of Zool. Excellent work from them. A lot of healing coming out, a lot of attention really needed on the tank, a lot of babysitting. This is pure shadow damage coming in. You can't shield block that. once it's down here in just a moment, they will be heading down the stairs. Abrakeydabra about 5 to 10% behind on the boss. Team D rushes down and starts to get rid of the 4th Reaping Wave.
This is going to come down to a
The
DPS
5th
race with Team D being exactly like maybe 10 to 15 seconds ahead of Abrakeydabra here, and they have the exact same amount of deaths on the board, so this is purely DPS race. I thought they were trying to reset the boss there. I was wondering why the rogue is still outside, but yeah, they kind of pulled the boss a little bit late there. They sat there and looked at him for a few seconds, which is not what you want to see in the speedrun environment. But that being said, they still have about a 15-second lead on Abrakeydabra, and they're going to have to make that up here.
And Mog actually gets his cheat death proc, does not manage to get away from that Quaking Leap too well. Baby Pig sitting not so pretty on health either, just sub 20%, finally getting some healing over time from Ab right now, as Abrakeydabra is rushed. It is about 10% behind on the boss. Now, we do know, of course, there's 96% trash on the board. It should be likely 100 at this point, so probably just a display here. The teams are indeed done with the trash and have Shadow melded off the 5th Reaping Wave, so it just comes down to who is going to kill this boss first. Team D had a 10% head start on the boss, and Zara, we know both teams are going to absolutely ignore the Raban. He's just a side cleave that you want to deal with, and they're going to focus all of their Bloodlust and single target damage into the next Raptor at 60%.
Yeah, of course, the second Raptor is really the dangerous point of the fight. It casts an AoE fear on the entire group. Baby Pig almost proccing his cheat death there, but just barely able to keep it alive, taking that frontal from Raban. That's the only really dangerous part of Raban. It does the same thing as the Raptors in the instance. It jumps to a place, does a frontal cleave, so as long as you move out of it, you should be fine, but that's just kind of lazy from him taking that damage.
Yeah, lazy, and the last thing you need right now is a death. Of course, the two teams don't know how close together they are, and in fact, Abrakeydabra actually managed to claw back in just a bit. They were 10% behind on the boss, and it's only about a 5 to 6% spread right now. Finally, Bloodlust comes up here for Team D right now, getting rid of Zala, of course, the mounted Raptor. All damage done to King Dazar during this phase will be redirected into Zala, and that Raptor casts an AoE fear every like 10, 12 seconds or so. Very disruptive, which could punt you into the tornadoes on the side.
Yeah, and we're going to see them actually try to burn Zala as quickly as possible here. It's just about to go down for Team D as they do get that last one Howling Fear off, pretty much stopping all damage in this melee comp. Zala does go down for them. And we do see, actually, Baby Pig dropping incredibly low to that debuff from the winds that go around the room. That's just lazy play.
It's lazy, but it was a bit unlucky, too, because they rushed into the boss after the Fear to DPS just as he threw out a wind, so it was kind of trapped inside of the boss's model. But they should have pre-planned ahead and not run into the boss's model, because we know that can happen right now. They do manage to stabilize, and they are at 45% on King Dazar, rapidly approaching the last phase, where there are some fairly easy-to-dodge traps coming in from the ceiling. You'll see them in the form of brown swirlies on the ground. Abrakeydabra slightly catching up here, about 3 to 4% now behind on the boss, and because of the sloppy play on the bridge Zyra, they don't have the advantage of the 2 deaths that Team D had earlier.
But at the same time, Abrakeydabra is very, very slowly catching up. They were 4% behind when Tazala went down, and right now they're only 2% behind. So we're going to have to see if this, we've been talking about Abrakeydabra all season long. There's this superstar team. We have to see that superstar DPS come out from them right now.
It's do or die here, and Team D is just holding on to this 3 to 4% lead right now. They're doing whatever they can to just finish off King Dazar. Now, things can always get out of hand. We've seen some spot deaths here from teams during cup play. Quaking Leap combo plus somebody accidentally getting hit by one of the tornadoes can easily finish the team off. Even, of course, the tank frontal just doing an immense amount of damage on Long and Divine Field on the side of Abrakeydabra. But Abrakeydabra clawing back right now, about 1.5% behind.
Yeah, and I mean, the difference in this DPS here, Swagfist is a monk main. He's doing 4k more single target DPS than Yusheng is right now, and they're clawing back right now, 2% behind. This is down to the wire here.
This is absolutely down to the wire. Final Quaking Leap coming out here for Team D as Ab drips below 40%. Baby Pig takes one of the tornadoes to the face right now and will be ticking heavily, but they don't have time to heal him. They need to get as much damage in as possible and try to finish this dungeon off before Abrakeydabra, and it looks like they're going to be able to pull it off here as they finish Dazar and take the first map 1-0.
Team D sealing the King's Rest there with a very, very tight race, and that was something that
teams before, and both teams left something to be desired in that first Underrot. So we're going to have to see, with all the experience they've had of running through this entire bracket at this point, whether or not they're going to be able to clean up their run in this dungeon.
And let's keep in mind here, we're in a bolstering environment, so any mob that dies, any trash mob that dies, will buff every enemy around it by 20% of max HP, and of course 20% damage. So you want to make sure to kill things at around the same time and maintain and sustain the health differences properly.
And something to remember here from Abrakeydabra, they play Horde in this dungeon for those Arcane Torrent AoE dispels on the skeleton packs later in the dungeon. So we're going to have to see, once again, if that comes into play. They definitely have kind of crafted their strategy around using those torrents. So, I mean, we're definitely going to have to look and see what that does for them in this run if they're able to be clean.
Yeah, a lot of teams don't really, when interviewing, they didn't really think or they didn't construct many strategies around alliance in this dungeon, just because having those Arcane Torrent dispels, as you mentioned, on the Guardians after Cragmaw is a pretty big deal. Abrakeydabra finally finishing off their trash. Both teams have indeed committed their bloodlust here. 13% on the board for them as Team D has finished up their remaining 13% and will be heading down 14%, excuse me, and will be heading down over towards the first boss.
Yeah, and of course, the thing to mention about being Horde, of course, the main thing, since you're not Alliance, you don't have that Shadow Meld available to you. So anything that you pull, unless it's on a rogue, you're stuck in combat with it. You can't drop that combat. So that's why we see both of these teams, especially Abrakeydabra, making sure they're dealing with this mask. They're going to proc, both teams actually, going to proc their first Reaping Wave and AoE it down with this first boss. Now, it is a fortified setting, right? So the boss isn't going to be that dangerous, but any errant Blood Bolt cast going off from the boss could be a death.
It hits the tank very hard, even in a fortified environment. I can attest to you, especially when I try to call for someone's interrupt and they don't listen to me, and it hits me in the face. But speaking of procs here, we have had Ashine's Cheat Death proc as well, so he's not going to have that available. Fortunately, not really any too dangerous DPS damage coming out until we get to the Screamers, of course, in the next room. But before that, we have to defeat Elder Liaxa, something that Abrakeydabra is about 12% ahead on over Team D.
Yeah, they definitely just were able to deal with the trash a little bit quicker than Team D was. And, something that might actually end up being is the Horde ratios kind of tend to be a little bit higher DPS because they're Blood Elf. They also have that passive crit as well, which is pretty good for the Outlaw Rogue as well as the Windwalker Monk. So that could be a little bit extra damage, but generally speaking, that's a pretty small thing in the grand scheme of things. They're just having better execution so far in the dungeon.
Pretty small indeed, and finally the last couple of Brave Bolts go out for Team D. A bit of a chunking damage on Baby Pig earlier because 3 of them managed to connect with him while he had one of the Reaping Soul stacks as well. But no harm done from them. But unfortunately, unfortunately for them, that is, Abrakeydabra has pulled ahead by another 10%, and they're good 20% ahead on this boss right now, looking to finish it off. Bolt goes off, and they were getting ready with a Spell Reflect, one final one from Divine Field there. Huge amount of chunking damage reflected back into the boss's face as they mount up and get ready to go right into the heart of Cragmaw's room. And Zyro, this room is really where we see a lot of teams, I mean, even in Method and A, we constantly have talked about it, a lot of teams struggle in this room because they overpull and overcommit, and there are just such dangerous trash mobs in here.
Yeah, I mean, the way you pull this room, especially in this speedrun environment, is you only have 4 melee interrupts available to you. If you pull more than that, more than that many mobs that need to be interrupted, you're going to have a bad time in here. You're going to have to be like, oh, I want to let a Sonic Screech go through, or I want to let one of these stuns from the Lashers go through and heal through it. They just have to make sure that they're keeping their CC, keeping their interrupts on cooldown, making sure that they're getting all of the important interrupts, and as long as they go through that, I think Abrakeydabra should have this.
Certainly don't want a French fry when you're meant to pizza that is going to cause a bad time. Swag here is fixated by one of the Blood Swarmers right now. We can see that red eye icon on the party frames at the top. A lot of damage coming in on the Divine Field. Keep in mind, this is a pretty substantial pull. All of these lingering mobs at low health are getting a 20% damage buff every time one of their allies dies. So a lot of tank damage by the end of it all, even if it is from the Living Rots, which are really kind of non-mobs and non-concerns in this scenario, but they start to certainly become concerns right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of talking about the team so much, we forgot to talk about the affixes of the dungeon. Fortified Bolstering by itself is one of the nastiest combos available out there. Just extra trash damage plus exponentially increasing trash damage whenever you kill something is bad enough, but add in Quaking on top of that, you're guaranteed taking 25% of your health almost every 20 seconds. This is nasty.
This is nasty and it's mean, and this is actually a double Bloodswarmer pull here from Team D. This is incredibly dangerous. Not only do they have the Sonic Screech cast that you cannot commit all of your interrupts to because there are at least 2 Lashers in the group right now, so they'll have to babysit those well, but the double damage of focus coming out for the two teams right now is extremely dangerous. Not just that, but you want to keep them centralized on top of the other mobs so you can cleave them down in this all-melee comp, and they're starting to kite them around in circles, not to mention the area denial from those Living Rots on the ground. Baby Pig taking a huge chunk of damage, dipping to 11% health right now, and the defensive Ring of Peace comes down from Yu Shang, just trying to buy some time for these rogues as finally the fixate goes off of Baby Pig and re-fixates on Mog instead.
Yeah, but the dangerous thing is one of those Bloodswarmers going down just buffs the other one, but fortunately they're able to kill the second one before it really gets any melees off onto Yu Shang. So, making sure they're keeping their priority damage proper, making sure they're doing a good job of that. That was one of the things we kept saying Abrakeydabra was doing incredibly well in the last dungeon. I mean, so many bad things happened in the King's Rest, but priority damage was something Abrakeydabra was doing incredibly well, making sure they're DPSing down the important targets, not just mindlessly AoEing things down. As long as they can continue to do that, they're doing a pretty good job so far.
There certainly is a priority of danger with the mobs in this room, with the highest being the Bloodstormer on the rest of the group. Ashine dipping quite low here, but Abrakeydabra has now dealt with their second, Reaping Wave in this room and is sitting pretty at 53% trash, whilst Team D is now combined their second Reaping Wave along with a pretty substantial trash pull here. Divine Field grabbing the rest of this room right now and trying to cleave it down as another Quaking pulses the group, which happens every 20 seconds or so.
Yeah, no, now Abrakeydabra is doing a double Bloodstormer pull of their own, and Underrot has both of the fixates right now, so he's going to have to make sure he does not get meleeed by either of those. That's why you see the Ring of Peace coming down to make sure the Bloodstormers don't get out of range. The Bloodstormers kind of have a little nuance to them, actually. If you stay in kind of a middling range, they won't ever charge to you. They'll just kind of start running towards you, but if you run too far, they will charge at you and melee you. So you are able to actually kite them around, but the problem with kiting them around is you're not having full uptime on them. So they're not getting AoE down, they're not getting cleaved down in the group, so you don't necessarily want to be kiting them around. That's kind of an unfortunate, circumstance for them.
Yeah, you have to kind of find the nice balance of how long can I stay in to help everyone DPS before I potentially get killed, or it's just too much for my healer to heal me. 55% trash on the board for Abrakeydabra right now as they look to finish up the remaining percentage that they need to likely proc their third round of Reaping, which they will, as quickly as they can, drag into Kragmaw and get started on the boss. Here go the last two Rots right now, 63% for them, and they waste no time as they rush in and grab Kragmaw over to the side. Divine Field getting ready to thunderclap his woes away and grab all of these Reaping mobs and cleave it down effectively on top of the boss. Team D just clean run from them right now, but just slow. A bit of mismanagement from the bolstering. We can see the sheer size of the Lasher on the screen right now because the bolstering does make aesthetically all of the mobs grow in size too.
Yeah, and I think this might be one of the things they were talking about when they said that their strategies weren't really top tier. They were just kind of average in the dungeons. This is a good strategy that they're running. They're actually running pretty much the exact same trash pulls and strategies that Abrakeydabra is doing it, but like you mentioned it, they're just doing it pretty significantly slower, to the tune of a 20% boss health right here. So they're not dying at all. They're just going slow.
And here comes a Quaking to separate the two teams. And the two teams are the 5 players, not the 2 teams. They're not in the same instance. But you're absolutely right, Zyro. Like everything, it's some of the story we saw with some of the Asian teams yesterday. Everything that a lot of the West teams did in one pull, some of the East teams would do in 2 pulls, or most of the pull and then kind of one pack at the end. It's just a bit slow. Quaking pulsing here on Abrakeydabra as they finish their tantrum off. Even though we're in a fortified environment, this tantrum is very dangerous. Does a huge amount of pulsing damage on the group, and when combined with a bad Quaking, can spell disaster for someone.
Yeah, we did see Team D was able to actually catch up there while the tantrum was going off. Of course, they'll have to deal with a tantrum of their own. And the reason that tantrum kind of stops your DPS for a bit is the boss will run all the way around the room, and you'll have to suck all of these blood maggots up. If you don't step on them, they'll spawn one of those maggots that will debuff your tank and do a lot of damage. So they kind of have to spread out and soak all of them. You even see you see 3 ticks going through right there. That could be a lot of extra damage on the group for no reason.
Zara, I don't want to be sucking up any of these ticks right now. I'd rather be stomping on them. They're absolutely disgusting. But the team does just that, and 25% here for Team D right now. They're starting, as you mentioned, to catch up just a bit. They started well above 10% difference between the two teams as the final tantrum comes in for Abrakeydabra, who's about to hit 10% on Kragmaw, and then they will rush over and start their Guardian packs. Of course, the advantage of Horde versus Lions, as we mentioned earlier, will be those Arcane Torrents should any or too many of those Blood Shields cast through. Here comes another pulse from the Quaking right now. Ab doing what he can to keep his group healthy. They are actually caught up immensely. That was just a huge burst of damage as both teams actually kill Kragmaw at the exact same moment, and they'll be heading over to the trash in just a second here. Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, Abrakeydabra kind of slowed down at the end there because they ended up pulling this whole skeleton pack in with the Guardian as well. They ended up kind of cleaving it down because they knew they had the boss dead before the next tantrum. There was no reason for them to actually focus it down. So they're definitely being a lot more efficient with their damage. We keep talking about efficiency. It goes back to Cup 1, Day 1. As long as you're killing multiple things at the same time, instead of one thing at a time, even if it's a boss, you're doing a better job of being efficient than the other team.
You're absolutely right here as Team D rushes in and pulls one of the Perilous Penne on the side, along with, of course, the 4 Guardians, actually, and the 1 Death Speaker. Now, the Death Speaker does cast that Wicked Frenzy on them, but the Wicked Frenzy going on one of the Guardians can actually be spell reflected by the Prot Warrior and then soothed by the rest of Druid, just getting a nice big chunk of damage on one of the skeletons and preventing a bunch of damage. No reason for these teams not to be doing that, as we see Abrakeydabra deal with their pack and they rush in, pulling the next round of Guardians plus the 2 Defilers. You already have to commit all 4 of your kicks for the 2 Defilers, meaning you're gonna innately leak not only perhaps even a raised dead, but the bone shields as well.
And that's where the advantage of playing Horde comes in. They're going to be able to Arcane Torrent any of those shields, those bone shields on the Guardians. Now, also, did you notice that Abrakeydabra, they didn't want any pasta. They just went ahead and used one of their blinds on that. What's one of your words for it?
Menacing Macaroni.
There you go, Menacing Macaroni. They used a blind on it, they skipped it, they vanished off the aggro, and then just went ahead to this AoE pull, which, if I'm not mistaken, will be their 4th reaping wave, which they can just pull into the boss and AoE down once again with their priority single target damage.
That's typically what teams do. We see another Spirit Totem summoned here for the side of Team D. You just want to walk away from them, not get hit. And it seems that both teams probably purposefully are letting some of the Shadow Bolt volleys go through just so they can actually maintain a kick on the Raised Dead. Raised Dead, of course, coming from that Death Speaker that will raise another Guardian into the fray. Certainly don't want that. Abrakeydabra, once again, has started on the boss first. 82% trash as their 4th Reaping Wave pours in on top of them, and Sporecaller Zansha already sitting at 78%. We haven't even started on the boss with Team D.
There was a lot of area denial for a second there. They had all of the spores come out, plus one of the Lost Souls explosions going out. It's pretty impressive that they didn't really get hit by anything except for maybe one of the spores on one of the rogues, and I think Elsarat also ended up soaking one of the mushrooms there as well. Pretty good from them. They did have one of the Tormented Souls off to the side, just chain casting Grave Bolts in, but they were able to get it into the pack there. And now all they have to do is just kind of cleave down the rest of this trash. They don't have any of the mushrooms left for this Harvesting Frenzy here, so they won't have any massive debuffs on the group, and they're just so far ahead on the boss once again, 25% ahead on the boss here.
Yeah, very tight space, not much room to move around for these groups right now, but they just can't seem to close up this gap, Team D, that you're mentioning, Zyro. They kind of closed it up at the very end on Kragmaw, but it was at the cost of at the benefit for Abrakeydabra of grabbing the Guardians and cleaving half that pack down already. So a bit of better routing, superior strategy, if you will, here from Abrakeydabra, really putting them ahead in the dungeon. But we saw these teams go head-to-head here 2 days ago, 48 hours ago, in this very dungeon, and it was neck and neck until the very end when Ab died, unfortunately, on the trash, and then Elsarat himself died on the final boss, but he died in a late enough fashion that they were able to just 4-man the rest of the boss down. So everything really clean from the two teams right now, but Dr. J, speaking of which, has actually procced his cheat death, just as I said that.
Once again, same thing as what they did at the end of Kragmaw. They ended up pulling more trash into the boss so that they could cleave it down. Once they get to the point where they don't need to deal with any of the boss's mechanics, instead of dealing with a single target boss, they're cleaving some extra trash down so that they can actually get their trash percentage more efficiently done. Now, because as a result of this, Team D is going to be able to catch up on the boss, but cleaving 3 things down, same thing, is a lot better than just killing 1 thing at a time.
Cleaving 3 things down is a lot better, but what's going to happen after this is both teams are going to do a mass pull of the Guardians afterwards. So I don't know really how much they're gaining, because now we're going to have the argument of, well, Abrakeydabra is going to cleave 4 things down, when TB is going to cleave 7 things down. So we'll see exactly what they gain, and hopefully it's enough, in their opinion, Abrakeydabra, and it works out for them. But it's definitely a very aggressive strat for them, and very dangerous as well, to pull the Defiler, including that Death Speaker, on top of Zansha. But they don't care. They down all 3 of those and immediately mount up, making sure not to clip each other with that Quaking, and move over to, as we mentioned, the Death Speaker and Guardian pull along with the Defiler.
The important thing to remember here is that Abrakeydabra had that 2 extra percentage that they had from their trash. We do see Team D actually doing the exact same trash pull that Abrakeydabra did. So even with that trash, I believe before the trash was killed, Abrakeydabra was at 82% trash and Team D was at 80%. They are still 2% ahead. So after these Guardian packs goes down, they will have to do a little bit different pull to the end of the dungeon if it's the same as it was on day 1. All Abrakeydabra will have to do is kill both of those 2 corruptors at the end. Team D will have to, cleave them one of those down with one of those pasta things that you like calling them.
I love those pasta things. They might be on a diet. Maybe that's why they're skipping so many of these Raging Rigatonis. But Team D, actually, if I'm not mistaken, Team D actually grabs one of the Corruptors on top of the pack. They might end up doing it. It looks like they're not right now, but that would certainly catch them up. Otherwise, you're absolutely correct. They will have to combine it with one of those Hazard Spaghettis later. Abrakeydabra won't. They have 4% left on the board, 2% apiece from these final Corruptors that will allow them access to the final boss.
Yeah, and I mean, they're pretty massively ahead at this point. Probably about the same as they were on that final boss. If you look at the difference in that 3rd boss kill, Team D is about 25 seconds behind where Abrakeydabra is in the dungeon. And I think they're definitely dealing with this Guardian pack a lot slower than Abrakeydabra did. Probably, once again, due to having that Arcane Torrent available on the side of Abrakeydabra, being able to just dispel off all of those bone shields at the same time instead of having to coordinate all of your interrupts is such a huge advantage in this dungeon.
Yeah, it is a huge advantage, and it just shows, I mean, the bosses are pretty on point for both teams right now. So it's just, in my opinion, superior routing and increased aggression, not to mention the Horde racials on the side of Abrakeydabra, which is superior, or have been superior. We've seen it. They have about a 25 to 30 second lead right now. They've dealt with the 2 Corruptors that are still sitting at 60% for Team D, and they're getting ready to head downstairs players to combine their 5th Reaping Wave along with the final boss.
And at this point, all eyes are on Ulcerat, right? He's really the only thing that can go wrong here, short of a full team wipe. If Ulcerat dies again early on in this boss, there's no way Abrakeydabra wins this dungeon, aside from a Team D full wipe as well. He did die last time. That's got to be in the back of his head. He has to remember, I messed up here in competition last time. That can't happen again.
No, it can't happen, and these spores will one-shot you. They have about, they do about 300 HP. Now, you can survive one if you plan for it with something like an Iron Bark on yourself, but he wasn't planning for it. It spawned very close to him, and it did just finish the job. Team D is looking to do so as well as they head downstairs right now, getting ready to grab their 5th Reaping Wave on top of the Unbound Abomination, but Abrakeydabra well ahead. They only have 10 seconds left on the Bloodlust, so they're a good 30-40 seconds ahead at this point, Zyro.
And at some point here, we should see the first Blood Visages be spawning from the Unbound Abomination, which are, of course, the only way you can do damage to these boss. Every single time one of those Visages goes down, as you see it going down right now, 1/6 of the boss's health will go down. So 3 sets of 2 will equal 100% of the boss's HP, and you can see right now just how far ahead Abrakeydabra is.
Where did you learn that fancy math, Zyro? You've been holding out on me all along. Unbound A-Bomb, 66% here for Abrakeydabra. Once again, if nothing goes wrong here, Abrakeydabra should be in line to actually tie this up, leading to our first game 3, not only of the day, but of the tournament right now. Finally, we have Bloodlust fall off of Team D. They have spawned their first Visage Wave, but we already see the second Visage Wave for Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra is just 1/3 of the boss's HP ahead of Team D right now, and like we've mentioned several times at this point, they are just firmly in the lead. But we got to keep an eye on Ulcerat here. He died at this point last time, this exact point in the dungeon. He died in the last third of the boss. At this point, they'll probably still be able to finish the boss, but they're so close together that, that death could cost them.
Yeah, I mean, it will certainly cost them, but you're right. Ulcerat can actually die at this point, and they'll be able to heal through it as long as they play the mechanics properly and cleanse the dot off with that holy aura that befriends, essentially, one of the players. But the final Visage round has spawned here, and a nice, comfortable, or certainly more comfortable than last time, win here for Abrakeydabra as they tie the series up 1 apiece versus Team D. Here to see, we can already see the 2 different starting zones for Horde and for Alliance. A lot of different strategies and perks coming out of these teams, even between the 2 Method teams. Method and A wanted Horde, and Method EU wanted Alliance. Both of these teams here, Team D is running the Horde side, and Abrakeydabra on top with Alliance.
And of course, the main thing to point out, that whenever teams were asked why they chose Alliance here, the main reason they always gave us is that you just get much more efficient trash on the Alliance side. And we're seeing a massive pull right at the bat here from Abrakeydabra on that Alliance side. We even saw that cool slow fall action from Dr. J.
Yeah, it was just for show, Of course, he didn't actually get any advantage from that in the first place. But important to note as well, we are now in a skittish environment. Not really too much of a concern for any of these tanks, especially with the rogues coming in. Umunk already going down here on Team D, though. Let's hold the horses just a moment. That's already a first death coming out. They opt not to use the battle res because he actually can and should release from the beginning of the dungeon. He does have the checkpoint there, so I'm not sure what the delay is right now. We'll have to check in on that in a moment. Nonetheless, he is still eating dirt on the floor. Finally, the Revitalize comes in from Ab. Oh, they actually skipped at the beginning, of course. Yeah, I'm sorry. So they actually skipped past the mobs at the beginning, so well on him not to release indeed. Now, Zyro, what we do have to talk about in terms of important affixes, though, is that Necrotic.
Yeah, Necrotic is definitely going to be a huge limiter here for the tanks. Of course, the more you pull, the worse that Necrotic gets, so we're going to see a lot of kiting from the tanks here, just like we see in Motherload, where there's also Necrotic. Just a lot of kiting around in circles from the tanks once the Necrotic stacks get too high. We've seen, I believe, even for Method and Net, we saw Nerf almost going down to like a 40 stack near the end of this dungeon, so there's definitely some very massive pulls where the limiting factor is just going to be that Necrotic.
Yeah, it gets really nasty at the end. Now, we're already in Chopper Red Hook's room here at Abrakeydabra, the first boss. Now, the first boss is mostly the same for the 2 factions. We have Chopper Red Hook on the side of Alliance, and on the side of Horde on the left side of the screen, as you'll see in a bit, it's Sergeant Bainbridge. Now, same base mechanics apply here. There's a Deadly Gaze on one of the ranged players where the boss is kited by them into bombs. You want to make sure you hit those bombs not only for a huge chunk of damage on the boss, but also increased damage taken on that boss. The only difference that the players have told us, however, Zyra, is that on the side of Horde, the first boss only spawns 2 wave of the adds that come in, whereas on Alliance side, they keep spawning them.
Yeah, but the thing is, in this tyrannical affix, they probably aren't going to get that many sets. I'd say maybe 2, 3, or 4. But on the side of Team D, their healer does go down. They could release and run back.
No,
but
they can't. They pull the boss.
Okay, this is disaster. It's going to be a full team wipe for them right off of the bat.
This is full disaster, full team wipe coming out of Team D right now, and they even committed their bloodlust to this. Not only that, but by force, they're going to have to commit cheat death trinket for Long, the cheat death for Mog. This is a disaster here. Team D scrambling to try and get back in a place right now. Abrakeydabra has already started and is well into the Chopper Red Hook encounter.
Something to point out here. we don't know which of the rogues used their shrouds, so their healer is going to have to release and run all the way back to battle to mass res the entire team. So this is going to be a huge time waster for them. It's going to be awful. Now, one of the things I was going to point out is that Team D's comp for this boss is a lot better. The fixate that we were talking about for the boss only goes on ranged players, and because Abrakeydabra has 2 range targets, it could be a lot worse for them.
Speaking of running back, you just mentioned difficulty of it. Ab actually died on the way back, increasing the death counter to 6 right now. And on top of it, Mog has now to release as well to help him along the way, likely with saps and distracts from the rogue, just to make sure he can make safe passage back.
I've seen this before. I've seen a rogue have to help his healer get back in a dungeon before. I think it was BlizzCon where it happened, but this is going to be pretty rough from them. We do see Chopper Red Hook down to 10% for Abrakeydabra, and it looks like Dr. J is not really doing that much damage, but the strength of the Frost Mage is not in the full-on AoE damage it does. It's in that focused single-target damage. As long as they can keep pumping out those frozen orbs, they can do a lot of single-target damage.
Not even that, but I mean, on this fight specifically, he was having half of those gazes fixate on him anyway, so he was just kind of running around in circles and losing a lot of damage. Nonetheless, Mass Stealth comes in from Abrakeydabra right now, who rushes as quickly as they can over towards the first spotter area, which is exactly where they're just about to end up here. Once this fades off them, we can see the spotter there, of course, with these 4 powder shots. A lot of smallies, or small mobs as we refer to them, on the side here, grabbing everything together. Now, there's going to be a fair bit of spike damage here on Divine Field in the form of some of those haste debuffs and just all the mobs turning and burning on him. We got to watch out for those necrotic stacks as well, and the curse that increases his damage taken by 15% per stack. But he's already playing quite defensive. Moves out Elstrat, taking a fair bit of damage right now. It actually goes down, and he has no battle res right now, so he has to release and start running back. The 2 rogues are trying to hang on. Swag procs his cheat death, and Divine Field has procced his cheat death trinket as well. They're trying to finish off the rest of this pack, but in order to get out of combat, they're going to need to kill this spotter, which is absolutely crucial to their strategy.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? They don't actually need the spotter for the rest of the dungeon, because they do have that 1 spotter in front of the second boss, and then they also have the 3rd spotter later on. They only use 2 of the spotters. If they did use all 3 spotters, that would be a strategy. But because of that death, they do have to kill this spotter right now, when they might have been able to use it on one of these next 2 pulls coming up, where they could, maybe double spotter down. Now they're just going to have to settle for 1.
They're going to have to settle for 1, and that mistake was not nearly as costly as the one from Team D. Team D is still not even halfway. They're only a third of the way through the boss on Sergeant Bainbridge on the Horde version of it. On the small screen on the left there, Abrakeydabra has managed to recover from this. 1 death on the board. They don't, of course, they didn't use their battle res. The guy who can battle res is the one who died, but they managed to stabilize, finish off the pack, and run over into the second boss's room. Dread Captain Lockwood, along with all of the trash. Huge AoE coming in.
Yeah, a little bit of unfortunate mishaps there for Dr. J. His frozen orb decided to not go anywhere and just stay right in front of him, looking pretty there.
Lucky.
It knows. I think that frozen orb knows how hard it is for melee classes to see the boss on the ground whenever there's a frozen orb on the ground. He's just helping the melee out. No, but that's the strength of this class and this spec that he's playing. You get as many frozen orbs as possible, and you just crank out those ice lances for single target DPS.
I mean, Divine Field could have thrown him a bone there. He could have dragged the mobs back into the orbs just a bit to help him out, but it seems that that was not too much of a concern for them as they're finishing up the rest of the trash right now. Divine Field has had a reset on those necrotic stacks. 16 now, a maximum of 50. Well, not maximum, you can go beyond 50, but 50 is the soft cap in terms of just being unhealable. 2% decreased healing per stack from him, so 20 for that, and they are dealing with their second round of reaping on top of it, whilst Team D is still looking to finish off Sergeant Bainbridge, which is sitting at 8% right now.
Yeah, and the thing about this boss on Tyrannical, Dread Captain Lockwood is a long boss. It takes forever to kill this boss, because every single time he gets to 100 energy, you'll jump back on the boat and you'll have to deal with another set of cannoneers and deckhands. And it looks like they didn't even try to root the deckhands on the boat that last time around, so we'll have to see if they plan on doing it here again. But, my guess is because the mage wants to be able to blizzard multiple targets from our frozen orbs, they're probably not planning on doing that.
Not planning on doing it, as the rest of the second round of reaping parades over in on the group. But I think you nailed it on the head. The frozen orb is just too crucial to have those extra targets in, and frankly, outside of accrued necrotic stacks on the tank, those extra 2 deckhands don't really do anything, barely any damage, and they are slowable, they're CCable, so Divine Field has plenty of opportunity to reset, especially with the permanent huge amount of slow coming out of that Frost Mage for Dr. J on the side. But Abrakeydabra is just dealing with their next rotation right now, as Lockwood has come down from the boat yet again at around 50% health remaining, whilst Team D is now chewing through some of the trash and getting ready for their spotter play. But they actually pulled the commander that patrols there. Not a typical pull that you see.
Yeah, that commander is kind of it's one of those mobs in the dungeon that the spotter is unable to be affected by. So it's not really like the best thing, but it might just be a mob count thing. They might not have a perfect strategy like Dr. J does in this dungeon. But like you mentioned, it's a little bit weird. This doesn't seem like a practice strategy from Team D. They don't seem very comfortable in here at all.
And then on top of it with the commanders, not only is it not affected by the spotters' artillery rain, but first of all, it has a huge amount of health compared to a lot of the other mobs, and it does a buff on all the mobs that decreases their damage taken by 70% for, I believe, 10 seconds, which is where the Horde side comes in. Of course, they do have the Dispel, but I do see you pointing, and indeed, Umunk did fall over there. A bit of a sloppy pull once again here from Team D, as they're just on the cusp of proccing their second Reaping.
Yeah, and Abrakeydabra has killed their final Cannoneer. Hopefully, Dread Captain Lockwood comes down at a roughly sub 20%, so they should be able to finish off the second boss here, as it is below 10% now. Like we mentioned, we were just talking about how Team D was sloppy, and we did mention it. Umunk went down again. They had to use one of their battle reses available to them, so they won't have that for the rest of the dungeon. And so far, it looks like Abrakeydabra is pretty comfortable in practice after that slight hiccup they had earlier in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, everything's looking great for them outside of that Elserat death. However, we do know some of the most dangerous trash and pulls in the dungeon are coming up in the form of the Dark Fathom trash. We know once you pull the third boss in that room, all of the trash, including 2 commanders that we just coveted earlier as being a huge pain in the butt, they are mixed into the fold, and you do have to kill them on top of everything because they're not affected by the spotter. Ashline taking a fair bit of damage on the way, and you can see some of those necrotic stacks that came in from melee as Divine Field finally starts to face tank this huge amount of mobs that came in. Of course, a lot of them coming in from Ashline. That's why he got meleeed. He was running off and tricksing them to Divine Field.
Yeah, I remember this is one of the polls that when we were talking to the teams about, when we were talking about Siege of Boralus with Abrakeydabra, this is one of those polls where, Dr. J is like, ooh, I have a strategy here, and he had that kind of evil grin on his face. He will tank all of the small mobs. He will aggro all the small mobs up to himself. He'll keep aggro with Frozen Orb and Blizzard, and we see Divine Field off in the corner tanking 3 Demolishers all by himself. And Dr. J is able to do this because of the massive slows that Frost Mage brings. On top of that, the rogues will be tricksing Dr. J instead of Divine Field, so he will keep all the aggro, and the rogues can just AoE everything down.
Yeah, the problem is they kind of misplayed a few of the artillery sieges coming in, and these mobs have lived for way longer than they're really needed to or than usual for them. On top of it, Divine Field's accrued 27 stacks of necrotic, and it's not like Protware doesn't do a small amount of damage. They've separated 2 different packs of trash that Divine Field can have contributed a substantial amount of damage to, especially with the misplay on that artillery strike coming down. But they have managed to pull it off right now as Divine Field has leapt away and reset his necrotic stacks from those 3 crushers, the demolishers, excuse me, and they are indeed well synced at least, which is quite nice for them, so that they have their AoE denial cast not too differently apart.
And of course, now what they can do is just cleave these 4 mobs down and proc their 3rd Reaping Wave, and then at that point they can actually skip to the later part of the dungeon with a Shadow Meld or a Shroud at that point, because they are able to actually drop combat right before the Reaping spawns. So we'll have to see what they plan on doing from here, but they can just kind of easily cleave down the 3 Demolishers. When they talked about how they did this section of the dungeon, they said they did everything in 2 pulls, and I don't know if they kind of meant that the Demolishers were a second pull, or if they meant that the entire part was 2 pulls. They did actually have 3 more mobs come in at a low HP. I'm not really sure where those came from. They must have been...
Those is what I mentioned earlier. Those were part of the pack that were meant to be killed, and Elserat goes down here now as well. Fortunately, once again, they dodge a huge bullet as they have the checkpoint present where Dread Captain Lockwood was just killed for the team, so he managed to just release and come back in, because certainly nobody would be able to battle res him. This is what I was mentioning, Zyro. This strat seems great and dandy, but they're playing it really sloppily. Those Buccaneers that came in on the side were part of the initial massive pack that Dr. J was the one tanking, as you mentioned, quote unquote, and kiting to the side that were meant to be killed with the spotter. They survived the entire time. Not only that, but they actually almost killed Dr. J because he had to emergency run back in and have Divine Field grab them off of him.
Yeah, and this reminds me kind of how their first run of Siege of Boralus went, where they weren't exactly clean. They had a couple random spot deaths in this exact section of the dungeon, and it looks like it's happening all over again for them. But fortunately for them, Team D has just had way too many wrong things go wrong in this dungeon, and they're just so far behind at this point. They haven't even gotten halfway onto the second boss yet.
Yeah, I mean, they have a huge amount of work to do, and we're starting to get close to some of the most dangerous pulls in this dungeon right now for Abrakeydabra. First, we have, of course, the spotter pull, along with all of the shots from... I'm just kind of blown away by what's happening right now. They have a massive amount of trash heading up behind them, and as you mentioned earlier, Zyra, we saw something like Method on A with the mass entangle down the stairs was very well done. The only control that they have here in terms of mass crowd control or mass slow is from Dr. J right now. This is ridiculous. There is a 3rd Reaping Wave in here on top of tons of trash. Everything is running around in circles and starting to get split up right now. They're not getting effective cleave from the spotter artillery rain, and Ashline is dropping so low. He has aggro on God knows what in this pack right now, and he's already at 8 stacks of necrotic and has procced his cheat death.
They are 100% relying on the spotters to take everything down here, but the most dangerous mobs in that pack haven't quite died yet. The snipers have just now gone down. That's why we see people getting so low. Actually, practice cheat death there. They're lucky to get away with just their cheat death, and Divine Field is incredibly low as well, but he hasn't quite practiced cheat death. They're lucky he didn't even proc his there. That was incredibly dangerous, and it seems like it was for no reason.
That was very sloppy. Divine Field is so lucky. He backed himself into a corner there and just prayed that the trash would die before they refreshed the 20 necrotic stack on him. He even had a poison applied on him, and all the sorties came down too. That was about 2 seconds off of being about a full team wipe, really. Here comes the mass pull, though, from the rest of actually, did they mass pull? It looks like they only pulled one pack. They're playing it a bit safer here, only dealing with one of the commanders first before they pull the rest of the pack. Huge amount of damage coming in once again on Divine Field, who's making sure not to get in melee range of the spotters, because as long as he's not in melee range, they will not, well, melee him. So just by being on the side of them, he's trying to bide his time with the damage, and not only that, but the necrotic stacks as well.
This is one of the things. This is the exact same strategy Abrakeydabra did in their first match against Method EU. They did one pull before pulling the boss to pull all of the rest of the trash in the room, whereas both Method NA and Method EU decided to try to pull all of the trash at once, and both of them were able to pull off that pull. So if we see Abrakeydabra somehow make it through to the grand finals, that's just going to be a huge loss for them against Method EU in this dungeon. They don't do this section of the dungeon nearly as clean as it's possible to be done.
No, not at all, Zara. You're absolutely right about that. Finally, we see the third Reaping Wave proc here for Team D, who has just now killed the second boss of the dungeon, long going in there and getting quite low already. He does not have his cheat death trinket available to him, so he's gonna have to be careful and not to overpull here as the rest of the big pull comes in from Dark Fathom's room. Of course, not as big. There's only one commander present here. Jay taking a huge chunk of damage right off the bat. Same with Ashine. Keep in mind they do not have the cheat death present on the rogue right now as Divine Field starts ramping up not only poison stacks and getting refreshed at max 5 stack, finally gets a dispel from actually no dispel. I think he's playing dwarf. Is he playing dwarf? He must have been playing dwarf, because he got rid of not only the poison, but as well the 25 stack of necrotic. So there goes that 2-minute cooldown.
Yeah, even that right there wasn't clean at all. Dr. J got bopped in the head by Hadal right as he was running out of the room. Didn't quite get the boss reset off, and it took him down to 30% at the start of the pull. But because they did have those double spotters up for that pull, they were able to pretty efficiently cleave everything down, and minus the commander that they had a single target down. But it looks, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like they killed one of the spotters. I think they only have one of the spotters alive.
I think you are correct, and they did tell us that part of their plan was a double spotter plan, so I'm not sure if things are going according to plan for them right now, or they just said, hey, this is getting too out of hand right now, we're losing too much time, we're not controlling this well, let's just kill one of them and be a bit safer. Nonetheless, they do only have one available to them. You can see it on the right side of the screen beside Dr. J here from our observers. Hadal Dark Fathom down to 83% health, something that Team D is not even close to starting. They haven't even pulled the trash in his room. They are so behind at this point, and they have 9 deaths on the board versus Abrakedabra's 2.
And important to mention, they only have the one spotter that they're just now engaging right now to deal with that massive AoE pull. So they're going to be doing it at the very least base with half of the damage from spotters that Abrakeydabra had available to them. So they have a lot of catching up to do. They're probably going to have 1 or 2 full team wipes from Abrakeydabra to come back in this dungeon, and it's not looking good for them right now.
No, it's not at all. Barely healing through that ricochet damage from the 4 snipers in front of the spotter. Long runs right in and gets ready to pull the entire room. Does so by tagging Dark Fathom with a weapon throw, which automatically aggroes all of the trash in the room, and he runs outside all the way around the corner, waits patiently for everything to come in, make sure tricks of the trade are active on him. You don't want those mobs spilling in every which direction. Now keep in mind, they are playing Horde, so they do have a bit of advantage here over the commanders that will bolster their group members with 70% damage taken decrease. You can just Arcane Torrent all that off. A lot of damage coming in from them. This is actually quite clean from them compared to what we saw from Abrakeydabra, but it's just, there's no way that's enough to catch up.
And they did just now proc their 4th Reaping Lift, so that's going to be a little bit of extra added danger to them, so we'll have to see if they're able to deal with that. They do still have the spotter available to deal with the Reaping, so it should be just fine. The Reaping is a lot less dangerous than what they just pulled, so they should be okay dealing with it. But Abrakeydabra is now at 40% on Hadal, 40% on a tyrannical boss. 60% of a boss's HP is aimed, and especially this guy. This is a single target beast. He has a lot of HP. They're so far behind still.
He takes so long to kill. It is crazy. Adele finally at the last 1/3 of HP for Abrakeydabra here on the main screen. We can see the spotter all the way in the distance. Now, the reason they're keeping that is because that spotter will be crucial in killing a lot of the demolishing and gripping tentacles available on the next boss, on Vikoth, the final boss of the dungeon. Doesn't really help on this boss in any way. You can't damage the bosses directly with it, but that is the strategy there as they reach 20% on him. 88% trash on the board for Team D as they look to clean up the remainder of this 4th Reaping Wave.
Yeah, and I mean, it just gets worse and worse and worse. I mean, they're almost an entire boss behind Abrakeydabra at this point. They're just being so unclean with their finishing off of this trash back that they pulled that any chance they had of coming back in the dungeon at this point, I think, are pretty much gone for them. They would need probably 2 full team wipes from Abrakeydabra to come back. And Abrakeydabra is just, they're not slowing down. Now, this isn't by any means a fast run. I believe, if I remember properly, that both Method A and Method Use times were in that 18-minute range, 18 to 18:30. So this isn't anywhere near able to compete with either of those two teams. That being said, they're not against those two teams right now. And once again, UMonk just another spot death on the side of Team D.
Yeah, not looking good for Team D at all right now. They do have, actually, no, excuse me, they do not have the battle res available. He can't release either. I believe they skipped some of the trash in that little town full of the Buccaneers and the Demolishers, so he's just kind of eating some dirt right now. And in order to res him, they have to commit to killing the spotter, which they do. Not only that, but they proc 100% off trash. They will not have the spotter available for the end of the dungeon, which a lot of the teams just kind of normalized into bringing over for Vikoth, that we see menacingly sitting in the water here for Abrakeydabra, who has downed Dark Fathom and is heading over to the last boss with their spotter.
And we keep talking about the spotter strategy in this dungeon. The important thing about the spotter is that sided artillery that we keep talking about in this dungeon is able to hit both the gripping and demolishing terrors. Every single blast from that spotted artillery will do 6% of the gripping terror's HP, so every single time a debuff goes out, that's pretty much a quarter of the gripping terror's HP gone. A massive amount of damage done, especially on the tyrannical setting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely key. There's just no doubt about it. If you keep a spotter alive for the end of the dungeon, some teams are trying to make it a bit fancier, and they take 2, as we saw Method A, and even Abrakeydabra do, but they didn't do it this time around for whatever reason, either misplay or the just last-second call to change it up on the fly. But gripping terror here at 54% right now for Abrakeydabra. They do have to move to 3 platforms. After each gripping dies, it will release the Kultiran Engineer in there that will go over to the broken cannon, and after a bit of time, repair it. You can then use that cannon to shoot Vikoth, that ugly squid, in the middle of the water for 1/3 of his HP. 3 platforms, and you are done.
Yeah, I don't think he's that ugly. He's just a squid, man. That's pretty rough from you. But like you mentioned, the engineer will come out, they'll have to shoot the cannon at the boss, and that's kind of one of the things, it's really difficult to hit that cannon shot sometimes, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, there's just so many angles that you can miss. I've seen it all over the place. Yeah, Nagura taught me a huge amount of angles that you could just miss the squid entirely, but, and it's actually awful. There is a cooldown on it. Jokes aside, if you miss it, you're in deep trouble here, but no problem for them as they wait for the first cannon to proc here. We can see the Kultiran Engineer just fixing up that cannon. The rest of the team uses this opportunity to finish the remaining Demolishing Terror and head over to the second platform as Elstrat drops one more sighted artillery on the side here and bring the spotter over with them. Ashine waiting for the cannon and waiting for the okay from his team that they're ready to start the next platform, which does not actually start spawning adds until you hit him with that cannon.
Yeah, and of course we are kind of making light of this fight, but there is a lot of damage going on in this fight. Every single time one of those surging waters go down on a player, that's a lot of damage. You can see that debuff on Ashine right now. Every single one of those ticks very quickly taking, 1/8 of his health about. So it does need to be dispelled. Now, if they do really need to dispel them, the rogues can use their Cloak of Shadows. Dr. J can use his Ice Block, but aside from that, there's not really too much going on. They have to dodge the area of effect on the ground, which you see going out right now. Thank you, Vikoth. Appreciate that. And all they have to do is get the gripping terror down once again to proc their cannon.
I'm not really sure why it's taking so long to dispel either. I mean, we do know 2 of them go out, and I've heard Jack be frustrated with this a million times. There's an 8-second cooldown on a healer's dispel. 2 of them go out at once. One of them should be dispelled immediately so that you can have access to the second dispel should they not have anything like Cloak or what have you. And Elstrat's starting to fall a bit behind, finally dispels himself. Swag will Cloak of Shadows the remaining one off, and they will healthily go on from here. But those are a lot of damage, but also area denial. When you dispel one of those, anybody caught in your area will get punted a fair few yards away.
Yeah, and this is just, it's all daisies for Abrakeydabra right now. They only have to deal with one last gripping terror to proc that last cannon to deal with Vikoth's health here. And it looks like they're going to be punching the ticket for the West here. It looks like we're going to have 4 Western teams and 2 Eastern teams at BlizzCon.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's looking like. And, pretty disappointing here. I mean, Team D really just, it kind of showed that maybe they didn't have the best practice on this dungeon. Maybe they didn't really pay attention to this dungeon. Maybe they were gambling on just finishing this with 2-0 today. But certainly a very inferior pathing and strategy, regardless of the fact that they played a Horde over Abrakeydabra, their opponents here, who did play Alliance. They're just finishing up right now on one of these Demolishing Terrors. They're actually playing it safe, if I'm not mistaken, before they move over to the Gripping Terror in the back, and they're looking to close out this map.
Yeah, definitely. Like the speed run play is definitely to go back and kill the Gripping Terror as quickly as possible, but, from people pushing high keys, that it's definitely a lot safer of a play to kill that first Demolishing Terror, so you have no chance whatsoever of wiping. That first Demolishing Terror has, I think, like 3 or 4 times the amount of HP. That being said, final gripping terror going down for Abrakeydabra, and all they have left to do is shoot that final cannon shot.
And let's hope they make it, Zyro, because they're about to do right that. They're going to finish off the spotter as well, skip their 5th Reaping Wave. Demolishing has popped up in the front for Divinefield. No problem as the final cannon blast goes in and seals the deal here as Abrakeydabra take the series 2-1 and advance to meet Method NA in the lower. And right out the get-go, you know, we're going to see, one of two strategies. We're going to pull these essences with us, or are we not? We see speed pods coming out of both teams right now as they head over to the top left. And we've seen usually a pretty aggressive strategy coming out of them where they grab a lot of trash on top of the Triad, which we're seeing Abrakeydabra do here right now.
Yeah, we see both of the teams going straight to the Triad boss here, popping that Boralus, pulling all of the trash from the left and the right. Of course, just the DK damage is going to matter so much, as you can see for Method NA, specifically Jakib just doing so much damage here to start. Ashine just holding his damage a little bit, as you can see in there. Maybe he didn't pop his cooldowns yet, maybe he's saving him for a little bit later. But yeah, the DK damage is showing off here.
DK damage is showing off a big time right now as both of the teams pretty much rifle through the trash, and they're neck and neck right now as they get started on Sister Malady, the second sister in the rotation. Now they have to work, as we already know, down to 50% on each one in rotation. It goes to Lena Malady and then Briar at the bottom. So neck in neck for these two teams, just 1% ahead. And it's really going to be the min-max that comes to play for these two teams, Nagura, making sure that you get the spell reflect in every 25 seconds for the bolt cast from the sisters, getting every interrupt in, just keeping mobs localized in the courtyard when we get there. It's going to be really down to the wire.
Yeah, most definitely. And this boss is one of the most difficult boss on Tyrannical. You can see Yoda dropping very, very low. You can see it's very hard for JB to recover the healing here, but they did manage to get up. We see the Nettles on Jakib here as well. Now, the Nettles are actually very an important ability here in this fight, because it hits a random player, it does a lot of initial damage, and then it applies some sort of grievous effect to them. If they are not healed above 90%, then it will just stay and continue to do damage. And the problem is that the aura of the next sister that is active actually does 50% minus healing. So if you still have the Nettles on a player while you transition to the next sister, then it's going to be very difficult to heal the debuff away.
Very difficult, and not just that, but difficult with the initial pull, because that's the sister that started with all of this trash, which is why they're committing their bloodlust and wanting to get out of that phase as quickly as possible. You just can't sustain non-stop through a 50% healing penalty on top of the group right now. It seems that Abrakeydabra is starting to pull slightly away with this one. They're about 20% ahead on that second sister and about to move over to Sister Briar, the final one of the three. Both teams sitting pretty at 6% right now for trash, after which we've seen kind of two strats go on here. Some teams opt to just kind of skip the danger swing full of captains and of course the Rune Weavers, whilst the other just does a mass pull in there.
Yeah, so Elsewhere is actually completely out of mana for Abrakeydabra side here, as the Nettles go up on Dr. J. Now, thankfully, Dr. J is a rogue, and he has a lot of defenses to make sure he's to survive here, and the boss is that soon. But if this boss would last any longer, then they probably would wipe, because Elsewhere, again, 0 mana, and that's one of the problems for Mistweavers compared to rest druids.
But fortunately for them, that is not the case, as they did down the boss, and once again, they get the mass stealth in. We see Speed Pod being popped here by Divinefield as he grabs all the essences and speeds down into this very dangerous hall. These captains do a tremendous amount of damage, not to mention the guards with their Shadow Cleave in front. Here comes a Soul Charmer, here comes the Rune Weavers as well. Some more captains and guards join the fold. This is a very, very dangerous pull. You already see the Absorb, the Life Cocoon come out on the side of Abrakeydabra from the Mistweaver, just getting a bunch of Absorb in on Divinefield as they rotate their cooldowns perfectly. Exact same pull coming in here for Method NA right now as they cleave down the explosives. Lots of damage coming in though as Yoda dips below 20% health, and a bit of struggle here for JB as Nerf Clap gets one of the cleaves in front of him. You can see that curse debuff. Shakib takes a chunk too, and Nerf Clap just cannot be healed above 20%. Finally gets chunked back up as they kite down the hall, and all eyes on Nerf Clap right now as he manages to stabilize.
They were so close for Method NA. I think it was an explosive warp that went off, but the whole team just dropped very low all of a sudden. So this is the danger of explosive, especially as they mentioned Jakib is their main explosive killer, and maybe this is why they're struggling with it. Maybe Yoda's not really used to doing it, and this is the advantage Abra has with the double rogues. They have 2 rogues to deal with the explosives, so in theory they could be doing big pulls and have the rogues just kill the explosives while Ashan is dealing with the damage.
Yeah, Shina just gets chunked a bit there and pops his, I believe, Death Pact, if I'm not mistaken. So he gets a defensive rolling there right away as they do the big pull in the hall here, getting ready to proc their first Reaping and combine it with everything out here. Method and A once again exact same pull, but Abrakeydabra beats them to the first Reaping wave, 22% on the board, and will soon be poured in with these Reaping Souls. Elsarat is going to need to make sure to get those Dispels on Divine Field on point, not to mention the extra amount of damage going off on the rest of the group. Spirited Defense casts are going off. There are a couple of captains, if I'm not mistaken, present in the trash here. Extremely dangerous mobs.
Yeah, there's just so much tank damage going on top of all the divas. As you can see, Abrakeydabra is dropping so low. Divine Field has this curse that I've been talking about. Divine Field is going down, and this is what I've been saying. They do not have a curse to spell because they don't have a druid. So no one can dispel this curse. The curse increases the damage taken on the tank. And we see the tank for Method and A go down too. As they don't, and Lighty going down. I think this is a disaster for Method and A. This might be a full wipe.
This is a disaster on both sides right now. Both tanks just not stay alive as the battle res has already come up on the side of Method and A. Nerf Clap goes down again, and JB follows suit. The rest of the mobs rush in and go back to the start of the dungeon where the players have released, and that's their only checkpoint present right now. They try to get back in and cleave everything down. Yoda goes down. No cheat death available now. He releases and tries to join the fold. Abrakeydabra is certainly coming out on top of this situation. Sloppy for them, but they only had 2 deaths as they managed to stabilize in the courtyard at 30% trash. Method and A here just having a struggle right now.
The exact same thing happening for both teams as the tanks go down for both of them, but Abrakeydabra managing to just recover. You know what? It might actually be because the DK was able to rest and Elstrat could just continue doing whatever he was doing. Well, on Method and A, maybe JB was the one resting, using that cast time, the global, to get him back up, and then other people were dying. And Abra also has 2 ropes, who, if they get aggro when a tank dies, they can just riposte, right? They're going to survive for a long time. While other people like a Monk or a DK will not survive. So the comp actually an advantage here for Abrakeydabra.
And one of the biggest problems really is that we know, Kara, once one of the tanks dies, all the threat is gone. All of the mobs are going everywhere. So exactly what you said, the advantage goes on to the remainder of the melee that inevitably have aggro. But really dangerous pull coming in here from Abrakeydabra. They've pulled the Soulbound Goliath in this tyrannical setting on top of the trash with Matron Brindle. Divine Field is barely hanging on. He already died earlier, so he does not have a cheat death trinket available for about 4.5 minutes now. Elstrat doing what he can to keep everyone nice and healthy, but he himself is at 50%. Divine Field getting another bleed from one of the Thorn Guards there as Matron Brindle has finally fallen over, but the Thorn Guard does need to be killed, and they do need to consider resetting the Soulbound Goliath soon. Otherwise, Divine Field's going to end up just getting one shot at one point.
Yeah, so the one disadvantage I have here in this boss with the Mistweaver instead of the Rasta Druid is that the Mistweaver actually can get stunned by the Thorns, and it did happen earlier for them. Well, on Method and A side, the Druid can just shapeshift into another form, and he will be immune to the Thorns. So that can definitely be a problem, but you can time it properly so you don't have the boss in the fire while a Thorn is going to come out before or after. But we see Astra just drop so low.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going into those fires. Every time you go into the fire, of course, it resets the boss's damage stacks, but does an increasing pulsing fire damage on the group. So you have to have the perfect ebb and flow balance of making sure that the tank is not getting gibbed, but that you don't over pull for the group. Here we go, Abrakeydabra pulling the remaining Thorn Guards and Thorn Shapers, excuse me, on the side of the dungeon to try and proc their second Reaping here in a moment. Now, these Thorn Shapers, you want to make sure you're interrupting that the Soul Essence cast. You don't want that getting the Soul Fetish cast getting off. We saw that be absolutely disastrous from some of the teams the other day. There's a Soul Fetish going off right now. It actually did get off, so if that Thorn Shaper dies, it's going to pass a 50% damage and 50% haste stack on to various trash mobs in the area.
So there was actually one explosive who just barely got killed at the very last millisecond. If that would have went off, I think people would have died as they've already been low HP. And this Soulbound Goliath seems to not be losing HP. While Elstrat is so low on mana. We've been talking about this. Mistweavers struggle with mana as the boss gets dragged into the fire, and there's more AoE damage for Elstrat to heal away. And this boss is still on 54%. They've been taking a very long time to single target this boss down. If you compare it to Method and A, they're already ahead on boss damage, and they've pulled the boss later.
Yeah, this is actually really scary. Now, Elstrat is tapped on mana. Abrakeydabra is about to proc their next Reaping Wave. They do so right now. Divine Field is barely hanging on for life right now as a bleed hits the group. Here comes the Reaping Pack. Elstrat, no mana. He's going to need to force Dispels on Divine Field every 8 seconds as often as possible to make sure there's not too much damage on top of the already destroying tyrannical boss Soulbound Goliath that is increasing damage stacks. Divine Field so low, dipping, and he actually goes down. They don't have a battle res available. This is indefinitely going to be a full team wipe coming in here for Abrakeydabra. Ball is now in Method and A's court, who has not procced their second reaping yet, but is taking it a bit slower as Soulbound Goliath is at 17%.
This has actually been really unlucky for Abra, as Elsred has been gotten almost all of the thorns, and Divine Field dropped very low. Elsred got the thorns, was not able to heal Divine Field, and Divine Field just goes down. Just a disaster for Abra coming in, as Elsred, as on the Mystery, were just getting all those thorns. Now, this time around, they had the disadvantage with their comp. Beforehand, they had the advantage, but this is going to cost them a lot more time than Method and A's 7 deaths cost them earlier, because they have to kill the whole boss from again. So they're definitely behind at this point. While Method and A's already down in Goliath, they didn't proc their 40% reaping wave yet, but still just one whole boss behind.
Yeah, one whole tyrannical boss behind versus a reaping wave is just no comparison here. Method and A is well ahead at this point as they pull the Thorn Shapers with the Thorn Guard on the side that really ultimately spelt Abrakedabra's doom just a few moments ago. They deal with those individually in order to proc their second reaping wave, which I assume they're going to end up carrying into a fairly larger pull. We'll have to see exactly what they plan to do with that, but Abrakeydabra wasting no time getting right back into it as they get back on the Soulbound Goliath, who is at 85%.
Yeah, so Method and A dealing with... So one more thing to note, though, I think Abrakeydabra actually copied this strategy from Method U, if I'm not completely mistaken, that they were pulling those Thorn Shapers in the corner on top of the boss. I don't think that was something Abrakeydabra did before, but I definitely know that Method U did this. If I'm not mistaken, Method and A pulled it after the boss, so a little bit of a safer strategy, but it worked out for them, as, of course, Abrakeydabra had this full team wipe. It might have been a reason why they were struggling in Goliath, because, of course, pulling trash on top of a boss costs is more healing required for Elsred, and we see Method and A doing a pretty huge pull. We see all of them drop very low. JB actually going down.
Oh,
Shakib just barely surviving, but Nerf Club is also going down.
No, Shakib barely gets the battle res off. That just became about 30 seconds ago for them, and he's just barely trying to stabilize right now, but Bleed's going out left and right. JB's getting low, Nerf Clap getting low again, and they're just trying to cleave everything down right now. JB just does not have the global cooldowns left. Shakib goes down, no battle res available as they try to clean up the rest of the reaping pack on top of that huge pull they did. So what they did there, Kara, was they actually grabbed the 40% reaping wave with the entire Hall of Maggots, which is already so much splash damage, and he just needed so much attention on Nerf Clap in the form of Dispels, not to mention the area denial from the Lost Souls. It was just too much to handle. They do manage to stabilize, though, right at the very end, but at what cost? With 2 extra deaths right now, and here come the rest of the devouring maggots.
There's so many maggots. You can see the whole floor is covered in them. You can see the debuffs on the players. You can only see 3 debuffs with this UI, but they might have even more than 2 on each player. It's just so much damage to heal for JB. Thankfully, there's nothing else going on other than the maggot spit debuffs on everybody. But you can see just how difficult these pulls are, with JB just struggling so much to heal everyone as a 60% reaping wave is coming in, and Nerf is just dropping so low.
He's just having so much struggle. Shakib finally joins the fold. He had to release and run all the way around the edge of the dungeon. Nerf Clap getting a dispel as frequently as possible from JB right now. They snowballed all of the trash and the second reaping wave into the third reaping wave, along with this Rune Weaver right here. And finally, a breath of relief for Method and A as they accrued 2 more deaths on the board and used their only battle res available. Not going to be available again for 7.5 minutes or so as they aggressively pull all of the survivalists in the room right now to make sure they cleave them down. Abrakeydabra still working on, as we mentioned earlier, a boss that takes so long. It's at 15% HP still, and they haven't even started this very dangerous maggot haul that Method and A is now wrapped up.
I think there's still anything that can happen in this dungeon, though, because even though Method and Ace ahead, I mean, you can see they have 9 deaths. There's still things that can happen to them, and this is one of those dungeons they said they didn't really practice that much, because this is really the only time they're gonna have to play it if they lose the upper final against Method U. So they didn't really put a lot of time into this dungeon, and you can see 2 casts going through. This might be a wipe, as everyone has 2 divas just doing so much damage to the whole group. Thankfully, this tyrannical and not fortified, so it does a little bit less damage, but still, everyone just dropping so long. These are mistakes that really can't happen, because this cost a wipe to exactly this team in one of the cup plays. They wiped to this exact pull, and that's why they lost the dungeon.
They're so fortunate this is tyrannical, because those double singing not double but twice a double a serpent cast that one out right now. I mean, that would have easily killed someone. You saw how low Yoda got there too, but 70% for Method and A, and I mean they're kind of just stumbling through this dungeon at this point. They grab all of the trash in the room with roll, as it's expected to see from teams these days, and up comes the Bloodlust. Huge amounts of damage coming in here from the Unholy DK. In just a moment it starts ramping up, and the damage meters are flying up. Nerve Clap on top of it, the tank, but Shakib says no and just just starts out DPSing everyone in the group as the trash just melts around them, soon to be proccing their 4th Reaping and combining that with Roll, taking advantage of that unholy DK damage as Abrakeydabra has done their own substantial pull. They're down but not out right now, and they're about to proc their 3rd Reaping Wave. They did that Paul a fair bit cleaner and have as a result caught up a fair bit to Method NA.
Yeah, definitely. I've been watching Abra doing this pull, and it looked so clean. People did not drop low at all. They had no deaths whatsoever. But now we see the Warrior, the Divine Field, actually dropping very low on the next pull here, as they have the Reaping Wave 60% on top of some more trash here. But Method NA already procced their 80% Reaping Wave, so they're 20% ahead, and they're already fighting on Ral. So Abrakeydabra needs to catch up a little bit here if they want to beat Method NA at their own game.
That they do, as Abrakeydabra is dealing with actually the same Survivalist pack, if I'm not mistaken, at least most of the Survivalist pack in that Lodge area. Indeed, they're just finishing up the rest of them right now, 66%, and a bit of scary moment there for both tanks, actually, as Divine Field dropped low, as Neguro was commenting there. Nerf Clap as well had some issues and dropped sub 10%, but they managed to stabilize. I'm not sure if we had any of their trinkets dropped. We'll have to see once they drop combat. Sometimes the UI does not update it until after that. Rawl now at 40% as they pull a few maggots from the kitchen, including the Rune Weaver. Actually, it's just the Rune Weaver. They left the maggots in there, and they've already dealt with those.
Yeah, Method NA definitely has enough trash already now to be able to just go down into the last 2 area in the basement, and that's going to be enough trash, so they don't have to backtrack afterwards. Now, Abrakeydabra has had a strategy on the first day where they would backtrack. So Abrakeydabra actually played against Method EU in Waycrest Manor, and they did lose, and they also played this strategy again where they do not have enough trash in the basement, and they would have to go back out afterwards. But this time around, they killed this room with the marksman, so they should have enough this time.
Not just that, but they did this really weird thing where they killed Matron Alma downstairs that nobody ever does. She just has so much health, and even on top of it, then she snowballs into the Reaping Wave later. But that's not really a concern for them, as you mentioned, because they just procced their 4th Reaping Wave on top of Rawl, something that Method NA has done as well. So these teams, once again, I don't want to say neck and neck, but certainly a much closer gap than what we saw with that full wipe on Soulbound Goliath for Abrakeydabra. They are 67% behind on this boss and 3% behind on trash. That's certainly not enough for the 2 death difference between the teams. 10 seconds is not enough to cover that, but there's no battle res available for about 3.5 minutes here for Method NA. So if anybody dies, really, that's it. There's no way to get them back up.
Yeah, definitely. And also interesting to see that Abra is actually changing their strategy here in Waycrest Manor, just watching other people play, other teams play, and say, you know what, we're going to change our strategy. I don't like ours. We're just going to do something else, do what Method U and the other team has been doing, and see how that goes. As Method NA is shrouding past this trash area here, going down into the basement, on their way to the next boss, and they're most likely pulling the boss with the trash, which we've seen from other teams before, because again, they don't really know where the other team is. They just have to do their own thing. They have to. They don't know that they're ahead. So they're pulling the boss here with the whole trash, and things can definitely go wrong here.
Yeah, they definitely can. Now, this trash pull isn't as dangerous as what we saw upstairs with the maggots, and of course, Rawl's trash as well. You just want to make sure to move out of the warding candles dropped by that Soul Charmer that we just saw there. It decreases damage taken by 50% right now. There's an explosive spawn in the back that's going to hit the team. Fortunately, everybody is nice and healthy, so they just managed to heal right through it. The other thing is you want to hit that Soul Volley. That's the main interrupt that you want to focus on. There's not too many others because they also sapped one of the Mark's sisters on the side. That does cast that Soul Fetish that could be quite disastrous, so they're just kind of dealing with it in a more controlled manner, because outside of just the Soul Charmer on this fight, the boss is not too dangerous, especially on something like a Warrior tank that has the Spell Reflect on the frontal.
Yeah, the only dangerous thing in phase 1 here is the random damage that Lady Waycrest does while she's just shooting things at players randomly. That does do quite a bit of damage, but easily healable. And there's no affix that really makes it much more difficult. If we would have Grievous or something, then of course it gets a lot more complicated. We see JB actually having one of the split debuffs here, the Disease, that could in theory be dispelled by Lady, but he chooses not to use that global to increase his damage, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And JB is just fine.
I mean, how silly of you to assume that a DPS would use a global for support or any form of defense. Lady Waycrest has finally joined the fold here as they enter the second phase of the Lady and Lord Waycrest encounter. She has siphoned her sets of 30 life over, her 30 HP over to Lord Waycrest, and has joined the fold at 10%. Nerf Clap did not have his Spell Reflect available for that frontal. You have it available of every 2 to 3 or so, depending on the frequency of the cast and when the phasing happens for Method NA. Abrakeydabra has finally killed Rawl and is indeed speed as well, stealthing downstairs to pretty much do. At this point, there's not really much creativity left with the pull, so they're going to do exactly the same pull that Method and A did. But they're just hoping that Method and A has a bit of a struggle. It's the only way they're going to be able to win this map. But we have a battle res coming up in about a minute or so, so that's a bit of safety net in favor of Method and A soon.
Yeah, one more thing to note is that Abra does have the Boralus, which they just popped for this exact pull, and they have a 10-second difference when it comes to death timers, but Boralus plus 10 seconds is probably not going to be enough to make up for the gap between Method and A and Abra right now, because let's be honest here, I think Abra took a long time on Ral, longer than Method and A did, because it looked like they were getting closer, but now they just pulled the boss so much later than Method and A, so there was a long downtime in between these two. And now Method and A is done with the boss. They're on to the way to the next boss. And what most likely is going to happen is they will pull the horse on top of the boss here and just deal with them while JB is jumping on a latch, making sure the horse are not jumping around.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to be doing. As Goraktul is indeed pulled line of sight, and the group hugs the wall tight to make sure that none of the explosives that we see in the distance there are going to affect the group, and they safely go off without harm. But the one spawning nearby, immediately Yoda runs down and cleaves, making sure that the area is nice and clean of any explosives. Gloom Horror is at about 60-70%. Getting to start rotating some form of crowd control on them to make sure that there's not too much damage input on Nerf Clap.
Yeah, we just saw a lot of explosive spawn for Method and A, and Nerf Club actually dropping very low, as all of them just drop low at the very same time. And of course, when they're not jumping, then they're all just going to hit the tank at the same time. But Nerf Club did recover. His HP is back up now. And one thing we've mentioned before, Jack mentioned especially on the desk earlier, is that when you stand in this ledge, which you have to prevent the horse from dying, then a wrestler can still DPS the boss with dots and Solar Wrath. Well, on the other hand, when you're a Mistweaver, you can't really do anything from this range. As we see one explosive actually go off for Method and A and everyone dropping very low, but they should be able to recover because there's not that much AoE damage going on as long as you play the Slavers properly.
Yeah, and they actually proc their last Reaping Wave too, so we can see a bunch of the Risen Souls in here. The rest will be joining in just a moment because they're located in very far parts away of Waycrest Manor right here. So in they come. That should be no concern compared to the 9 Gloom Horrors that they had to kill earlier because of the teaming environment that we are in here. And Goraktul hits 50% for Method and A, as Abrakeydabra is still just chewing away at the second phase of the Lord and Lady Waycrest encounter.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra, just this one wipe on Goliath just cost him so much. It looks really good for Abra, as Method and A had this kind of a struggle on the trash as they had their tank die and people just continued to die. And Abra was actually having the upper hand. But then they did this one risky pull with Goliath where they would pull Thorn Shapers in the corner of the room, Elstred just completely out of mana, Divine Field dropping low, Elstred getting the thorns, not being able to heal, and it just cost them so much time. As Method and A are about to win the first game here, as they're about to down Goraktul, they already do have the 100%. The only difference between them is the 10 seconds death timer, but there's no way Abrakeydabra is going to kill a boss in 10 seconds.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way that's happening. Goraktul 15% here, and yeah, I mean, that was just a big misplay. There was like no communication, I guess, on Soulbound Goliath, where they took a chance, because Elstrat, when they pulled that pack, was already He had no mana left. But Goraktul here at 5% for Method and A as they look to close out the first game and take a 1-0 lead over Abrakeydabra. Cheers come all around, and certainly we did not see a Dr. Waycrest Manor here today.
That we did not, as the latter is facing elimination in the Freehold.
Back into the land of the Freehold, brothers, as we start on up here. Both teams going right up. Now, we've seen some teams actually pull some of the 9-pack at the bottom usually, but it's just more inefficient because then you end up doing a 14% plus a 6% for your first reaping. So both teams actually just, as usual, grabbing their first 20% right off the bat. And we do know Method and A, Nagura, JB talked about this, they found a bit of a sneaky strat to not have the tank be thrown around by the Shattering Toss.
Yeah, so they're jumping up a ledge, doing this whole like snapping spot thing where the healer gets targeted by the throw because he's the furthest away ranged target by the Enforcer throw, but because he's standing on this spot, he's not actually an eligible target, and they just kind of don't do it. As Nerf Club actually drops very low, proxies from Zombie Bargain Trinket, but he should be able to recover at this point, as now he's back on normal HP.
Yeah, I'm not liking this this kind of shield wall play there from Nerf Clap. He pops shield wall out of desperation after already proccing his Cheat Death Trinket, essentially dying really, instead of using it as a blanket to mitigate a lot of the incoming damage. So just a little too late from him there. And but he does sneak away. Won't have that 6-minute CD active later. A lot of trouble coming in here for Abrakeydabra as well, as Divine Field starts to defensively kite. A lot of sloppier pull from them. They just don't know this trick that JB did there. That saved Method and A ton of time. They've already procced their first reaping and have started on the first boss.
Yeah, interesting to see that Abra is actually so slow. It might just be the Sanguine again. I mean, Sarah has talked about this, that Divine is actually usually really good at kiting the mobs with Sanguine, but every time we see a Sanguine dungeon today, it just seems like they're struggling a lot. As we saw in the King's Fest earlier, where the mobs just healing here and there, and this time around, it just took them so long to do this trash too, where you're wondering, maybe the mobs healed again on their pull because they were so much slower compared to Method and A. They only get 2% more trash, so that's definitely not going to make up for the boss HP that they're losing here.
Yes, Sanguine has been hugely detrimental to this group right now. And in fact, I actually think they overpulled. There was a crack shot with full health on the side there, and it looks like they dropped aggro via Shadow Meld so that it just kind of ran away. So that Shadow Meld should be active by the time they go past the Enforcer on the next bridge, but nonetheless, they finally managed to scoop up the first of this reaping wave and grab it over to Sky Captain Craig, who's just finished his first phase at 75%, and the players will be dancing around the outside while we know Elstrat will be on the outside, opposite side of them, baiting all of the Guano down. Now, Method and A is only 2% trash behind because they just pulled exactly what they needed to at a perfect pull with a very sneaky strat, jumping on that roof, and it shows. They're now a good 20% ahead of Abrakeydabra on the boss.
Yeah, Abra definitely needs to catch up somehow because that 20% is not going to be caught up lightly to Method and A. As again, I mentioned before that Method and A just had a faster time on stream yesterday in this Freehold dungeon, so Abrakeydabra already behind. As you can see, if you look at the damage also, it's just a slight difference between, of course, healer DPS is not very detrimental here because the healer has to be out, so all they can do is really cast that Solar Wrap, as you can see in Method and A's side. But Yoda actually dropping pretty low, but Sky Captain Craig already about to go down on Method and A's side, while Abra is still on 25%.
Still on 25%. Sky King Crag is about to fall right here for Method and A as they get ready to skip the next Enforcer on the bridge. Now, teams are just hugely inefficient to deal with this, so either somebody kind of pulls it to the side and vanishes, or you'll just Shadow Meld at the end of the bridge, whatever it may be. Shakib getting crit on the way in, though. That's not what you want to see. That's a huge hit. You got crit from that Enforcer going in, chunking down to 17%, but no death, fortunately, there for Method and A. That would have been very unfortunate. Abrakeydabra here, about to down Sky Captain Craig at 3% and follow suit down the bridge. A lot of this is really going to be determined to what kind of pulls they do really for the mass amount of trash coming in and how well they control that bursting Nagura in front of the Council of Captains and of course the Ring of Booty.
Yeah, we see Method and A doing the same strat as the last time, as JB just walks off, making sure he starts the RP event here. So he talks to that NPC here, and then once he talks for a while, he will spawn the pick that you have to click later on. And now he will stealth back, while the rest of the team just deals with some of the mobs here with the neutrals and the trapper. Now they have to be careful here when they kill those neutrals because they actually do apply debuffs to the group, so you want to be careful that you don't die. As Nerf Club actually drops so low, he goes down.
Oh no, Nerf Club goes down. He doesn't have his trinket available from early. We saw it proc on that trash, and I mean, what goes around comes around, girl. We mentioned it with that sloppy play, and some of that not pre-pop shield wall has cost him the death here. Battle res has come up, not going to be available again now for about 6 minutes as they struggle to kill the rest of the trash here in the corner. Only the trapper is left, making sure to move away from that Sanguine as the next round of traps go down, and JB has shapeshifted in order to eat them and not get rooted and take the bleed. So he's trying to help his group out here. Nerf Clap is now stable, hopefully well rebuffed by the group, and they will move on to the Council of Captains, an opportunity that Abrakeydabra can certainly jump on here.
Yeah, and those neutrals, they do apply bursting to the whole group, so what probably happened, either they rolled the bursting or they stacked it too high. Of course, when your healer is not here, you have to be very careful. Of course, they know that their healer wasn't here, but definitely something went wrong, and also the fact that the trinket wasn't available, as Abrakeydabra also struggling with the bursting as everyone drops very low, but they actually just refreshed the bursting in the last second here, which is something the healer never really likes to see.
No, but it does have the Tree of Life. I know you're not a big fan of that, but the Tree of Life is there for Elstrat, and he's just pumping out the regrows as much as he can, conserving the mana as much as he can as well, backing out of the Sanguine Divine Field here, making sure that they don't make too many more of those mistakes. We saw them have a lot of trouble with King's Rest Sanguine earlier today. It actually ended up costing them the match because of it, and we already saw some sloppy play with it before the boss, so they're doing what they can to rectify those issues as Abrakeydabra is about to proc their second Reaping, and Method and A sitting at not a pretty 50% health across the board for the team as JB struggles to heal over time. The rest of the group procking their second Reaping, and usually pulling it into the Council of Captains. We'll have to see if the teams do that, and indeed they do. Well, at least on the side of Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, so Abra is actually, they're not that far behind anymore. They already engaged the boss. They have the Reaping Wave. Method and A also engaging the boss. They do have 4% more trash on Method and A side, so that's the only advantage Method and A has. And this boss, we've been talking about it already. It's Jolly and Raoul that are active, so not the most difficult combination of bosses here that they have to deal with. Eudora is usually the most difficult boss that they don't have to deal with this time around. And there's also the brews on the floor that kind of help you out sometimes, depending on their RNG, of course. You do want to have the bad brew, because the bad brew damages the enemies, and it actually does more damage than if you have a good brew on your team.
Yeah, and I'm kind of just watching the brew management that you're speaking about. The problem is Method NA is having a real inconsistency with them. We're only seeing the brew applied. Like, why is Lighty not have the brew right now? There's only 1 to 2 DPS at a time getting these damage-increasing brews for the Method NA side. Once again, Shakib and Yoda have it, and Lighty is certainly in there. He might be helping a bit to make sure that he manages these mobs on the side, but we're getting a 3 set of buff brews over on Abrakeydabra side, and it shows they only started the boss about 10% before Method NA here and finished it 30 to 40% before them. Excellent brew play from Abrakeydabra there as they mass stealth immediately and head over to the Ring of Booty.
And they also got the extra 4% that they were behind on trash while fighting the boss, so they definitely ahead at this point. It's good to see that Abra actually just increased or made a better strategy, or a faster, more efficient strategy from the last time around. As they're in the Ring of Booty now, you see Divinefield going up the bridge here, probably pulling 2 or 3 trash groups together. And this is one of the more difficult trash groups because they have a lot of fixate mobs, which can be dangerous if you don't immediately soothe it away or have a stun to interrupt it.
No stuns indeed. Captain Jolly finally going down here for Method NA, who's about to hear the call of booty and head over to the Ring of Booty themselves and start to grab the pig. Lightning making sure to start the RP for Ludwig von Tortolen. Abrakeydabra 44% here has done a pretty substantial pull on the side. Divinefield said, I've had enough. I've made sure the mobs are low enough, and he heroic leaps out of the group to make sure that they slowly trail behind him and drop Sanguine in a nice line as he safely sits on the other side and gets ready for the bursting onslaught onto the group. Method NA doing I don't want to say a huge pull here. Actually, did they pull the patrol as well? There's a pretty substantial pull, I suppose, here. About 8 to 10 mobs right now. Nerfclap indeed this time did pre-pop his shield wall to make sure that they're nice and stable off the bat.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra having 5 stacks of bursting there. Elsewhere just barely managed to out-heal the stacks in his Tree of Life form. Now, one thing to note as well with this affix combination, I've talked to Sally of Method EU, and he actually hates the affix combination in this dungeon the most out of all of the combinations from the land here, just because a healer has to deal with the bursting when the mobs go down, but then your team also wants you to use your Typhoon to make sure the mobs are not in the Sanguine. So you have to heal plus Typhoon, make sure you're in the right position. There's just a lot of things for the healer to handle here, and you can see it, just the healers just having so many things to do. Both the healers struggling a little bit here as Abrakeydabra proc their 60% Reaping Wave and are fighting Ludwig.
Excuse me, what's his name?
Ludwig?
That's right. Say it all. Don't be shy. Method NA here about to proc their 60% as well with Ludwig von Tortolen. In just a moment here, they're going to kind of pour it in and take advantage of that Unholy DK. Same thing that Abrakeydabra just did earlier. Huge damage coming in, but Ashrine actually ends up going down. This is not a good situation for them. They do have the Battle Res available from Elserat, who is back on that Resto Druid. Gets Ashrine up immediately and makes sure the group is healthy as the bursting stacks start taking down. Not too much trash present there. Ludwig von Tortolen about 30% health or so. He has a lot of health, especially in this fortified environment. So they're well bit ahead here of Method NA, but certainly have blown a bit of the lead with that death. That extra 5 seconds that they had favor out of Method NA is now gone.
You see Dr. J actually proccing his Sheet Death and also standing in the Sanguine for a little bit there, as Waycrest was also standing in the Sanguine, just giving Elsred such a difficult job, as Elsred is completely out of mana. If you can look at his mana bar in the top in the raid frames, he goes into cat form because there's nothing else he can do at this point, just trying to finish off the mob so he can get out of combat and get a drink off to get his mana back. You can see the DPS in both of the for both of the teams, as both the healers try to do as much damage as possible, both of them doing approximately 10k DPS as well, while also trying to heal the whole group, which is difficult again with these affix combinations here.
Indeed, and they run upstairs and do a pretty substantial pull here from Abrakeydabra side. Actually, it's only an 8-pack here, so it shouldn't be too bad for them, as they want to make sure they maximize the amount of downtime that they have while Trothak, the third boss of the dungeon, spawns in the ring, which takes usually about 25 seconds or so. So they want to maximize their output. Elserat has had his drink. Divinefield once again heroic leaps out as the group gets low to make sure that he can trail that that Sanguine along to the ring, and hopefully stands on the edge of the ring to not get too much Sanguine in the ring of booty, because they don't want that area denial during the Trothak encounter. Divine Field using that time to grab a couple of the neutral mobs on the side so that they can well control the bursting coming in and get near that fourth reaping. But so much bursting coming in here, and Jay actually dies because he procced the cheat death earlier. Divine Field hanging on sub 20%. Nelstrat just barely managing to heal through the rest of that bursting with, once again, the Tree of Life, Nagura.
That was a very bad refresh of the bursting here. They had 4 stacks and then refreshed it at the very last second to give it a 5 stack. That was such a bad just control of damage by Abrakeydabra. That was definitely the damage dealer's fault to not control the bursting properly. Elsewhere tried his best to heal him up with this Tree of Life, but Method and A at this point, they caught up a little bit. If you look at the percentage now, Abra just is on 80%, but Method and A is 78%, so they're not far behind at all. Now Abrakeydabra did engage Trothak, and they are popping their Bloodlust, while Method and A is doing the exact same thing, just a couple of seconds behind. So this is a very close game, and if you look at the death, it's 2 deaths for Abrakeydabra versus 1 for Method and A, so it's only a 5 seconds difference, but it can matter because they're so close to each other.
Yeah, I mean, this is they can afford those extra 2 seconds because of the death difference, as you mentioned here. And Dr. J, once again, what comes around comes around. He procced that cheat death earlier in a most silly fashion, just getting a bit of extra damage on him, and just didn't have that available for the death. Trothak now 55% for Abrakeydabra, while 63% for Method and A. They started the boss virtually at around the same time, perhaps a couple of seconds later for Method and A. So Abrakeydabra is certainly showing some extra single target damage prowess here as Method and A tries to keep that gap at only about 10% on Trothak, but they do have the advantage of the extra death on the side of Abrakeydabra. Both teams have 1 battle res available to them, and it'll all come down very soon to what they're going to do and how they're going to handle Harlan Sweet's Cannonball Barrage with the surrounding trash. Finally, Method and A starting to close the gap a bit to 5%.
Yeah, you can see the damage a little bit closer now. So Method and A pumping some more damage at the very end, as you can see. Now, just keep an eye on the damage to compare the 2 teams. Now, one thing to note, though, of course, is that you can't always say, "Ooh, this guy's doing more damage than the other guy. He must be better." It's all about cooldown timing and reaping, of course. There's a lot of AoE that is basically useless damage on the reaping. Any sort of cooldown or AoE slash can kill mobs like with not a lot of HP, and sometimes rogues or people that don't get a lot of single target damage from AoE just hold back their damage to let other people do the AoE because they actually gain single target damage. So make sure you don't pay too much attention when there's a reaping wave on top. And then of course the Proud Warrior damage is also just a lot of clapping. Clapping.
But speaking of single target prowess, Method and actually comes out on top on that encounter. And, you know, I really got to beg the question here. You know, JB out DPS'd Elsrat there. Elsrat was at the end of the exact same pull as Method and A, and JB had 70% mana left. So a bit of mismanagement of resources there, and JB's extra damage certainly didn't make up for the 10% difference that were between the 2 teams, but it helped. Nice bit of Lord of the Rings view there on Abrakedabra's side, on the right side, as everybody crosses the bridge together. Both teams at 80% apiece. Advantage to Method and A as they do the exact same skip at the exact same time, but Method and A's advantage of 5 seconds of death difference between them and Abrakeydabra could come into play here as we see a death grip come in on one of the Buccaneers from the bottom, and they engage Harlan Sweet on the side of Method and A.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra actually pulling the middle pack straight away with Harlan Sweet here, which is something we haven't really seen from them before. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that it's Sanguine. You 100% do not want to drop a Sanguine behind underneath the boss. And of course, we also have bursting, so you want to be very careful with the bursting, especially on a boss fight, as Divine Field just drops very low, as you can see here. But Elsrat does have the Tree of Life, he should be able to keep up the tank. And they have to be careful to not roll any of the bursting stacks anymore, because they haven't been so good at it earlier in the dungeon.
I mean, these enforcers are going to be an absolute nightmare soon, and it's so questionable on where they're going to die and where the boss is going to be positioned at that point because of the shattering throws. The tank is just getting tossed left and right, and you could have a bad shattering throw on them as Harlan Sweet is doing a slight cast with his slicing winds. You kill one of the enforcers on top of it. Somebody's not paying attention with their ROP. There it is, finally, the Ring of Peace bump. They're not paying attention to the Ring of Peace or the Typhoon, and you can get a lot of healing on this boss that has a fair bit of HP even in this fortified environment. But absolutely neck and neck here between the 2 teams. Wow. Only about 1% ahead for Abrakeydabra, but they have the 4% trash advantage. Not really the biggest deal in the world, though, Nagura, because we do know these teams are going to use the Cannonball Barrage and, of course, the Ravager's painful motivation to kill a lot of the trash very quickly.
Yeah, definitely not a big difference here in trash, and you pull it on top of the boss anyway, so if you just passively cleave the trash down and still single target the boss, then it doesn't matter if you kill it now or later, so this difference really doesn't mean a lot. And now the 5 seconds from the death counter might actually matter so much between those 2 teams. teams. As you can see, Harlan Sweet just 50% on Abra side, while Harlan Sweet on Method and A is just like 4% behind, and it's a 45 setting. So the percent really doesn't mean that much at all.
No, it doesn't mean that much. Well, it means something, I gotta say. You gotta kill the boss from 100 to 0. But the Harlan Sweet here at 45% for Method and A. Abrakeydabra starting to get just slightly ahead. They're at 6% lower than Method and A for Harlan Sweet, but they are behind on the trash by 5%. But as we mentioned, they're going to just pull something with these Cannonball Barrage. It already looks like they're getting in position with Harlan Sweet to grab something else as Divine Field grabs him over and takes the Commander pull plus the 2 Buccaneers right now. A particularly saucy pull here as the Officer is quite damaging to the tank and quite debilitating for the rest of the group right now. Here comes the Cannonball Barrage. Harlan Sweet 25%. He's already entered his double damage phase.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra should be able to kill Harlan Sweet here before. They also pulled extra trash that they need to get the 100%, while Method and A only needs 3%. So they have the 100% now on Method and A side, so they will proc the Reaping here as Harlan Sweet is about to go down for Abrakeydabra. This is going to be so close, as the only thing left for Abrakeydabra is the 3%.
99% trash on the board. Harlan Sweet about to go down. Dr. J goes down for Abrakeydabra right now. They just can't finish off the rest of this trash as Method and A finishes it up and grabs the dungeon from underneath Abrakeydabra. What a disappointment at the end for Abra, and Method and A comes out with the sweep. Woo! That was a close one. We go and siege Boralus, and what more fitting than a faction war here of Horde versus Alliance?
Yeah, we see Method U starting off on the Alliance side. We see now actually gathering a bunch of mobs here. We've seen the strategies for most of the Alliance teams start very similar, where you have a huge pull at the very start. And Method EU was this one team who got 50% of the trash before they even engaged the first boss. While Method and A is playing Horde, and we just see the Shroud coming out of them, just skipping a bunch of mobs. So pretty much doing the exact opposite.
The exact opposite. We do know one of the key strategies of Method and A in this dungeon with an excellent time as well has been the double spotter play. So they have a lot of back-loaded trash. We do see a mass pull here, of course, with the line of sight that didn't go so well for Team D earlier today, but they have committed their bloodlust to it and have rounded all the marksmen up in the corner here as huge damage coming in here for Nerf Clap, and of course all of the DPS on that team. Method EU at 11% trash on the board, denying the running away with the Ring of Peace there to make sure everything is nice and congested in the middle. And you're absolutely right, Nagura. Method EU kind of prides themselves on getting about 50% of the trash before they even engage the first boss here, whilst Method NA focuses, as I mentioned, with the double spotter later in the dungeon.
Yeah, so Method EU not only is killing all of the mobs from the Alliance start, but they also jump down and do the whole Horde area as well, which is the trash that Method A chose to skip. So Method EU just cleaning up all the trash area here to get as much trash as possible. And we see Mara's actually falling into the water.
He got hit by the shark! Oh, no!
He got hit by the Schlobber. No, Maris can't do that.
Oh, the Schlobber knocker pushed him over into the water. And for those who don't know, if you get knocked into the water here, you have, I think, 3 or 4 seconds, you get a debuff of a shark that insta-kills you. So Mears unfortunately became fish food there, and 1 death already for Method EU. Nagura, maybe you were right. They said they were a bit shaky in practice earlier. It's certainly not the Method EU we know to have that kind of mistake, but they're trying to stabilize and recollect themselves here as they moved over near the first boss's room, dealing with their first reaping, while Method and A is just on the edge of getting their first reaping going, but they want to deal with this boss first.
Yeah, so Maris did come back to the group now. He did release, so they didn't have to use any battle rushes here as the spawn point is very close to them. Now you can see this dungeon is actually necrotic, so you can see now having a lot of necrotic stacks, almost up to 40, but the mobs are about to die here, so he should be fine. And that's also one reason why we've seen mages in this dungeon, because mages can slow the mobs, so it's a lot easier for the tanks to kite, but none of these teams want that slow. They think their tanks are fine without them too.
Yeah, they think they want them, but they don't. Sergeant Bainbridge here, 29% right now, as JB does well to get away from that hook and re-kite Bainbridge into that next bomb, getting that not only huge amount of damage on the boss, but damage taken increase as he drops down to 13%. Method EU still chiseling away trash. We know they want to focus a ton of the trash, and they're only now starting to get into the first boss's room, as the Nigger mentioned, they do clean not only the Alliance, but the Horde side trash as well, and then they'll be starting to work on Chopper, Red Hook as well.
Yeah, so one thing to note here, actually, on the first boss, on Alliance side, the Vanguards that spawn throughout the boss fight, they actually just keep coming on the Alliance side, while on the Horde side, if you have 2 Vanguards active, there's no more spawning. So the first boss actually is slightly easier for Horde side, but because both of those teams are killing the boss so fast, you shouldn't get a third one anyway, so it's going to be fine for both of those teams, as Method and A already downed the first boss, and they're on their way to the next trash back here. As you can see, the commander is charging around, and you want to make sure that you don't stand in that charge so you don't get stunned.
Oh, a bit of a misplay there for Method EU right now, is now actually ended up line of sighting Xaylia with a lot of Reaping Soul stacks and Necrotic stacks, and what happened is he actually ticked down so low that he procced his Cheat Death Trinket just over that misplay. Naguro, we just saw in the last series how costly that can be later in maps, so now not going to have a Cheat Death on the tank for 6 minutes as they get ready to finish off their second Reaping, which they just did here after the 40% proc, and they pull Chopper Red Hook, the first boss of the Alliance encounter, which largely is the exact same mechanically as you mentioned, except for the add spawn rate and frequency between the Horde and Alliance versions. Method and A has moved well beyond that and is dealing with a spotter and their first round of Reaping, which is just about to be killed.
Yeah, another thing to note here is that Method U saved their Bloodlust up until this point. So Method A is going to have the Bloodlust available a lot earlier compared to Method U, just because of the difference in boss pull time, basically. At this point, if you look at the percentage, Method A is not actually that far behind at all. They're 10% trash behind, while 1 whole boss ahead. So it's still close between those 2 teams. And as I mentioned before, it's only 20 seconds between the 2 teams, as they've both played Siege already before in this tournament. So the one death, if it's such a close game, can actually matter the one shark death from Maris.
I love that view there of Lighty riding JB as he kind of leapt over out of the bridge. That was cool to see. Method and A wasting no time though with their second round of Reaping, has brought the spotter with them and has already engaged the second boss of the dungeon, Dread Captain Lockwood here, making sure that they shower down everything. JB gets clipped by one of the frontals though. Fortunately, it is not enough to kill him off, so he just manages to heal right back through, and here comes the Maraud of Reaping, the second round of Reaping that they killed earlier in the dungeon. Cannoneer firing left and right now as Captain Lockwood has disengaged back onto the ship. Method EU just about to finish, actually not even, they still have a quarter of the boss left on Chopper Red Hook. You know, something that we always comment in these dungeons, that you want to see Bloodlust for kind of an efficiency pull to cleave things down on top of a boss, but Method EU kind of just killed the second Reaping, had 1 or 2 trash mobs, and then engaged the boss and popped Bloodlust. So not the most aggressive pull in the world, especially out of a team like Method EU, Nagura.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like they're going a little bit slower than they did the last time around. So maybe it's really true that they are just exhausted today, and the practice didn't go so well either for them. Now, usually one thing that happens for Method U, which is kind of a phenomenon, is that they actually have better times on live play, on tournament play, than they do while practicing. So maybe the same thing is going to happen again, and they do just warm themselves up and just play better here at the actual tournament than they were at practicing. But right now, Method A does seem like they're ahead.
Yeah, they are certainly ahead right now, but we do know a lot of the most dangerous trash in the dungeon comes later on in a Dark Fathoms area with those double commanders and all of the, well, the spotter play, of course, the snipers, a lot of poison going out on the tank too, so we'll have to see once they get to that kind of breakpoint or chokehold in the dungeon. Method and A now dealing with their next round of phase transition as they have rooted some of those deckhands on top of the ship to make sure that they just don't have to deal with them and to make it easier for these necrotic stacks to not apply to nerf just as much. Cannoneer about to hit 1%, they'll grab the cannon, shoot the boat, and re-engage the boss as they jump down. She's about 50% health right now. It's a very, very long encounter, Nagura, this one, because she just goes up so frequently. You have like 35 seconds, maybe 40 seconds of uptime on the boss before she disengages back.
Yeah, that's why sometimes on live service you do want to use that Bloodlust to make sure that you get one less phase, maybe, because it just takes so long, as you mentioned. Now, Method U is on their way to Lockwood as well. They just have to deal with the trash in front. And one more thing to note is that Method A is doing this double spotter shenanigans, really, where you keep the spotter from the trash before Lockwood. So you can see it in the corner here on Method A's side, on the right side. While Method U, the last time around they played this dungeon, they did not do double spotters. They only had 1. So they killed off this spotter here that you can see, and they just went without it. But maybe they changed the strategy now, as the spotter is actually in the middle of the combat here.
Yeah, it is in the middle of combat, and they're well, they did use it to kill their third round of Reaping here. I believe they still kept it alive, if I can see.
Yeah,
it's half health. Yeah, not too far from the boss right now. So they might have indeed adapted that strategy from some of the teams that they saw use it successfully. Really, just Method A is the one that used it most successful, the double spotter that we saw from these Siege of Boralus runs in the prior series. Method A here about to down the boss. Hopefully they get it before she disengages, because once she disengages, even if she has dots on her or anything like that, she will not die once on the bow. She'll stay at one health, not even 1%, just 1 health until she dies. But Method and A managed to squeeze past that as Lighty gets a Dragon Kick in and makes sure to stop the event of all the gunners shooting down the alleyway. Big pull coming in here for Method and A right now. Method EU has the advantage that they've already procced their third Reaping, 65% trash, but are 75% behind on the boss that was just killed. So Method and A needs to make up some aggressive pulls, but Yoda getting chunked here and procs his cheat death right into the pull.
Yeah, so Method EU actually did kill off the spotter here, so they're only going to do 1 spotter just like they did the last time around. While Method A, of course, still has their spotter from before Lockwood, so they're just going to drag it through the dungeon here, making sure that the trash gets hit by the spotter, by the friendly fire. But one thing to notice as well, that some of these mobs, the ones with the most HP, don't actually get affected by the artillery from the spotter. So you don't actually gain that much time, because those demolishers, as you can see, they're the ones that take the most time to kill. And if all the other mobs are dead a little bit faster or slower, in the end it's not going to matter, because you have to kill off the demolishers.
In the end, it doesn't even matter. Fragment's taking with a lot of health here. Finally gets down sub 30%, but gets rid of that bleed finally as he gets some healing support from Xaylia. And Dread Captain Lockwood only now sub 50%. This boss just takes ages, as we mentioned earlier. So Method is using all this time to catch up on the trash that Method EU had an advantage over at 66%. Lighty getting chunked down here and just manages to stabilize as they're about to proc the third wave of Reaping here in a moment. And there it is, 61%. Reaping will rain down on the group as they want to make sure that they slowly move around all of these mobs and clip them with the artillery strike coming down from the spotters that they have.
This is actually so difficult. It looks a lot easier than this, but you can see
JB
JB being
got
stunned by one of the bananas here. And those bananas, as you can see, if you only have 1 ranged target, then they will also spawn in melee. They do prefer range, but you need at least 2 of the range to all go on them. So since there's only 1 ranged target available, the rest of the bananas will go into melee range. And the closer you are to the Buccaneers, the less of a travel time there's going to be. And if you're really close to them, it's almost impossible to run out of the spawn point, and you will be stunned. So of course, rogues do have something like Cloak to avoid it, but you can't do it all the time. And then there's so many other things you also have to watch out for, as you have the artillery from the spotter that you have to put on top of the mobs, and then you also have demolishers doing a frontal slam, and you have them do an AoE fear. So there's so many things you gotta watch out for as melee.
But we do know that Method and A are professional Mario Kart players, and they can avoid those banana peels at all costs as they pull everything they need. And this is where JB really kind of loved the strat that they had. They pull a bunch of the trash at the bottom. He mass roots them on the way up so they can slowly deal with these snipers at the top with the second spotter that they've just collected, and get rid of the snipers, which are so dangerous with their ricocheting shot. You can see the amount of kind of CC and crowd control. Finally, 1 round of shots get out. They've already done an intimidating shot. They've already done leg sweep. They've already done the shockwave. They get them down perfectly, and now they're going to use the spotters to kill the trash at the bottom.
Yeah, so if you look over at Method U's side, they're at the exact same spot that Method and A is now, because they could just shroud all the trash up until this point, because they killed so much trash at the very start of the dungeon. So now what they're going to do is they're going to engage their spotter as well. So from now on out, also Method EU is going to play with a spotter. They're only going to have 1 and not 2 like Method and A, but Nerf is dropping so low. I do believe something happened to him, and Yoda dropping very low too, but they should be able to recover here. But again, this is just such a dangerous pull for not only the melee, but also the tank, because if the tank actually gets stunned by one of those bananas, it's going to be almost a sure death for him.
That's actually exactly what happened there. Nerf got stunned by one of the bananas. That's why he got so low, but fortunately he was already quite healthy when that happened. The stun's only about 1.5 to 2 seconds, so he managed to just get supported by JB, and no death there for them as the double spotter rains Hellfire down on all of the mobs, and the 4th Reaping Wave, which is now spawned for Method and A. They pull it over, or they're going to start pulling it over into Dark Fathoms area.
Yeah, and both of the teams actually have the exact same percentage at this one. They're both on 81%. This game is so close between those two, as Method is pulling the boss here, but only to reset it, because if you pull the boss, then the whole trash is going to aggro to you. So you pull the boss, making sure that you reset, but then Franklin's actually going down as he does have aggro. The cheat death was not available for him as he goes down. They do have a battle rest, so they do get him back up, but now it's 2 deaths for Method U. Well, Method A still has a super clean run and 0 deaths on their board.
Everything is rooted in the corner for Method U right now. They don't want to get too many of those necrotic stacks. Gingy taking a huge chunk of damage and now getting low as well. Xaylia certainly has is a work cut out for him right now as everybody starts to stabilize, but they still have to get in the middle of all those mass-rooted mobs to start raining some of the spotters' artillery down on them. They just want to deal with the commanders on the side, which are not affected by the artillery fire. Shakib on the side of Method and A has proc cheat death as well. Yoda does not have that available. Both teams extremely vulnerable here as Nerf Clap has 2 stacks and increasing of the poison and is trying to get away way to reset those necrotic stacks away from the commander, but Dark Fathom is right in his way. Fortunately, he has just enough space and gets back in on the commanders to try and DPS them down, as they will engage Dark Fathom here along with the commanders in just a moment, keeping one of the spotters alive. Did they kill one of their spotters? I can only see one in the corner there, Nagura.
I'm not sure, but Method is struggling so much with their pull right now. They did reset the boss over there, but now it's actually going down. They do have a battle rush coming out of Xayah, but everyone else is aggro now. Xayah even himself dropping low. You can see Xayah just having so many necrotic stacks on him because of the aggro. Marriage is slightly, barely surviving here, as Fragments also has no cheap death available, so they're just struggling so much with this trash pull that they're doing right now. You can see some of the snipers here are CC'd in the corner, but there's a CC broke, and now they're just shooting random targets here as everyone's dropping really low.
This is just sloppy from both sides right now as Yoda goes down on Method and A. They do have the battle res available and get him up right away to try and finish off Dark Fathom here. It's going to be a very long encounter. Indeed, there is the second spotter. Quite low health, but definitely alive for Method and A, so they're still opting to use this double spotter strat, which will be hugely beneficial to them should they be able to pull it off on the last boss. Method and EU finally shaking off the cobwebs and getting onto the Dark Fathom encounter as well with their one spotter that's left over from the trash. But they've accrued an extra, not only 2 deaths on the board, but now they don't have a battle rest for pretty much the rest of the dungeon. This is not the Method EU we're used to seeing right now, and favor certainly towards Method and A.
Yeah, most definitely. Method and A has such a clean run, so they did have one death during this fight, but they still have another battle rest available in case something goes wrong, and it's a 10 seconds different as well from overall death timer. So Method and A doing such a good job here in Siege, and you can see that with the double spotters, they're also going to do the last boss fights just so much faster, because the friendly fire from the spotters actually damages the tentacles as well on the last fight. So of course, if you have 2 spotters, you're just going to be so much faster compared to Method U, who only have 1 of them. So it's definitely in Method and A's favor. But we've talked about how difficult this dungeon is, so it's definitely things that can go wrong still for Method and A here.
2 spotters are definitely better than 1 when you find yourself on the last boss here on Vikkoth. But first, we have to finish off Dark Fathom, who has just reached the last 1/3 of health for Method and A, 35% right now. Method EU here at 60%, not too far behind. We do know how strong they are on single target damage, but not only do they need to overcome that 30-somewhat% damage, but an extra 10 seconds faster on the last boss with only 1 spotter. I mean, look, if there's any team that can pull this off, it is Method EU, but with how well Method and A has played, not only this map in the previous series a day or 2 ago, but here today as well, it's going to be near impossible to beat them.
I really hope their nerves are going to be fine this time around, because we've seen in the past Method and A playing against Method EU, and it's looking good for Method and A, and then something happens at the very end of the dungeon and they just somehow have a full team wipe coming in, and then Method EU is going to be the winning team after all. So let's hope something like that does not happen again for Method and A, as they're on the lead right now, and they're about to down Dark Fathom here, the second to last boss, and the only thing left for them to kill is the last tentacle boss. And one thing as well, that if you're Alliance, you have a much longer RP right after this boss. On Horde side, the gate just opens almost immediately and you can go through. Well, if you're Alliance, you actually have to wait 30 seconds or something like that. So it's even another a downtime for Method EU right after this boss here.
Dark Fathom keels over here for Method and A. That heads over to Vikkoth. As you mentioned, advantage to Horde here. They run right down and are ready to start the encounter with a double spotter. So Method and A right now looking quite primed to take this first match. Method EU still has 11% left on Dark Fathom, plus that bit of RP before they have access, and they have 1 less spotter, a theme that we're constantly going to be coming back to because this is a huge deal on this boss.
Yeah, in this last fight, I mean, there's a couple of things you're going to watch out for. Now, you see the debuff here on Yoda right now. One of them was on Lydie before. It's a magic debuff that, of course, can be dispelled or immuned off, but it does do a lot of taking damage if you do not dispel it. And also, when it gets removed somehow, we see Shakib actually proc the cheat death, and he's going down. They do have a battle rest to get him back up, but J.B is dropping really low, too, as he got hit, I do believe, by one of their artilleries, and he does not get the rest off. Okay, now he got it off, but this cannot happen again for them. As I've talked about it before, they have to play well here in this last set, because now they're out of battle reses.
Yeah, they're out of battle reses, and he didn't. That was good communication by them. JB actually went and re-resed him on the side because there was sighted artillery chasing him, so he wanted to just make sure he was resing him in a safe location and didn't just instantly get him killed. Immediate dispel comes up on that first, on the first debuff that comes out. They always come out in doubles, so you'll have 8 seconds dispel later on, and you want to make sure that when you get dispelled, you're not near anybody else you will punt them quite far away. And these are the same waters from the beginning of the dungeon where Mir's became shark food quite early on. So you make sure you want to make sure you don't swim around in them. Spotter right beside the team here, making sure to move around it, because if you do get in melee range, it will hit you right in the face, even if you're not the tank. Here comes another sided artillery from JB that kites the rest of it in to get that gripping down as they get ready to finish off their second phase.
Yeah, and having a double spotter in the last phase is not only difficult because you need to drag them through the whole thing, you need to make sure you see them somewhere, but you also have the double artillery on people, and of course it also causes an area of denial for your own team. So you want to make sure you place them in the correct spot, especially if you have two of them at the same time. As they're on their way to the last platform here, they do not have the Boralus available compared to Method U, but at this point Method U is way too far behind. Method NA only has to do this last platform, they have to kill off the gripping tentacle, and then they can shoot the boss. The only thing they have to do is get the last 2%, which is from the spotters that they're still alive.
Yeah, that should be no problem for them. And, you know, Method U's only saving grace here is that they save their Bloodlust for the final platform, but there's just no way that's going to make it up enough time, especially when the majority of the damage that come on these tentacles is from the spotters anyway, and Method NA has two of them. So here comes a bunch of the artillery raining down. Gripping Terror is now at 40%. As soon as that dies, we only have to wait a few moments for that engineer to repair the cannon, and that means Method NA will be able to kill off the final two spotters and finish off the dungeon and claim the first. But Shakib reproc sheet death again. A lot of damage going out as Lighty has the dot going on him. He goes down right now. If they cannot res him, another battle as the tentacle finally goes down. They're going to have to wait just a bit and survive to make sure that they can shoot the cannon into Vikoth, and they do so along with killing the remaining two spotters and finally take the first game off of Method EU. Woo! That was a scary finish at the end, Nagura.
Big roller coaster ride on that one, but Method NA taking game one off of Method EU in Siege of Boralus.
As I mentioned in the cup play, you know, Method EU was always the team that when you got to this dungeon, they always had something new, something small about their pulls. Skip this part of the bridge, do this part of the bridge in this order. And this time as well, when I talked to Now just a couple days ago, or a few days ago before the tournament even started, he said they had a completely never before seen pull pattern coming somewhere between Machimba and the bridge trash leading onto the council.
Yeah, it's a very small thing. I think it's actually going to be a reaping skip, the 80% reaping skip, which no one else has done before, and they figured, why did no one else do this before? They just came up with it, but it's still small things that matter, especially in a dungeon like King's Rest, because it's such a straightforward dungeon, and every little small thing can matter, as Method U is pulling the whole boss room, as Method NA doing as well, and popping both of their Bloodlust here.
Yeah, this is an extremely dangerous pull here right now, and we're going to see the tanks get out of dodge real quick here. Now, we are in a sanguine environment again. The tanks want to make sure that this is kited just about as the mobs are dying to make sure they stay out of sanguine. A lot of misplays came in here earlier from Abrakeydabra. It actually ended up costing them the match. So it's absolutely crucial that not only the tank has a proper kite pattern here, but that he's getting the support needed from the rest of the group in the form of Ursul's Vortex, Typhoons, Ring of Peace, whatever you can to make sure these mobs are not sitting in sanguine.
Yeah, and it's very dangerous too, because there's so many caster mobs that do so much damage to the tank if he's in range. That's why you see both of the tanks just kind of running around and kiting as much as possible so those deathly chills don't go through on the tank. And you see the champions still be alive for both of the teams, and once they are finished off, we will proc the reaping, and we will also see the reaping be pulled on top of the boss. But it seems like both of those teams are finishing off the mobs the very same second. Not like at the match before where Abra was playing against Team D. Team D was doing the trash quite a bit faster than Abra.
To be fair, they actually did it quite a bit faster than both of these teams right now, so this is actually a pretty slow finish to the trash for both method sides here, but pretty much at around the same time as you mentioned, that's what matters. They're facing each other and not against Team D here. Golden Serpent has been engaged on the side of Method, and they slightly faster over Method EU, but they're neck and neck now on percent. They have to make sure to not have a single hiccup as we see that Cloak of Shadows come up from Ginger right now to make sure that he can sit in that Shadow Smash and just deal as much damage to the boss as possible. Now getting punted away from that area, Denial deals a fair bit of physical damage, but he wants to make sure that he keeps the boss in place as much as possible to maximize damage on their team. But Method NA looking real good and just maintaining this 2 to 3% lead.
Yeah, this is such an important game here. This match, King's Rest, is so important for both of those teams because every single small mistake can matter here and will cause huge problems. As we've seen before, where Team D was playing against Abra, it was such a close match of just a couple of seconds in between those two teams. So you want to make sure that you don't have any of those goals go through to the boss like happened to Team D before, and you don't want to have any of those spit gold debuffs kill any of the members, as it is a tyrannical setting, of course. So the spit gold does do a lot of damage to each player.
Yeah, deals an immense amount of damage, and it really starts to tax the healers by the end of the fight. They start running out of mana as well, and you just want to make sure, especially for a player, for instance, like Xaylia, who just likes to be as offensive as possible. We've seen a few situations during Cup play from these teams that Xaylia just runs out of mana and is desperately doing what he can in cat form at the end to help finish off the boss, while now is ticking to almost 0 health. They've really dodged a few bullets, but once again, neck and neck between these two teams. There's only so much they could do. They're showing their single target prowess, and the rest of it is mechanically not exactly the most difficult fight in the world, just very unforgiving numerically, as long as those blobs are kept in check. But we have 2 rogues on either side, we have a Windwalker on either side, we have Ring of Peace, we have Typhoon, we have Ursul's. Plenty of opportunity for them to, oh, okay, that was really close. Plenty of opportunity for them to make sure the blobs don't reach the boss, but on Method and A side, that was so close. That Ring of Peace came down at the last second.
Yeah, you gotta be careful here. As you can see, Method, you're actually struggling a little bit. Mirror's actually going down here to one of the ticks from the Spit Gold. They were falling behind with the debuff. Salia almost died as well earlier to his own debuff. And now Salia has to be careful to be able to heal himself here. Maybe they were running out of defenses, but something definitely happened, as maybe that's maybe the damage that Salia has been doing just kind of made sure that he had last hots on the people, or maybe he was wasting some of the defensives to make sure that he can do more damage. And now he's got another Spit Gold. Hopefully he does have something left for him to be able to survive this debuff. But yeah, you could see in the damage meters that Salia was doing a lot more damage than JB, but that's not going to matter if you let one of your players die.
Yeah, I mean, he's just being a little overzealous right now, and just too much damage output, and it started to cost them. You know, the entire season, the entire tournament, he always likes to tread this fine line of just barely enough healing on the group. I trust the rest of my group. I'm going to output as much damage as possible, and they got caught here, and it did not work out for them. Either that, or there was a shark in the gold there, and it came out of the water and killed Mears. But nonetheless, Mears did go down, and they'd managed to battle res him 5.5 minutes until their next battle res is available, into a rather daunting gauntlet coming up after this. Golden Serpent 1% here, as Nerf Clap unfortunately procs this cheat death trinket right at the end of the encounter. That's not what you want to see right before the gauntlet.
Yeah, it definitely might have been a shark, but we see both Method and A and Method you heal the boss at the very same time here. So damage-wise, they are at the same level. The problem is, of course, the one death will mean that the 5 seconds difference between those two teams might matter in the end. We see both Salia and JB are not close to the raid frames right now. They're not close to their team, and that's because they are pulling the 2 constructs in front of the first boss room to be sure that their team can damage them while this gauntlet here is going on, because there's a little bit of downtime in between the trash. So killing the constructs is very efficient here.
Very efficient indeed. Nerf Clap really has to bunker up and play fairly defensively here while his healer's missing. They make sure to get out of that frontal right now. Shakib pre-pops his cloak to be able to stay in there and DPS King Akul as much as possible, and they do bring them outside the room to make sure as much as they can that the Sanguine is left outside the room, so that they have as much area to kite and move around in once they inevitably proc their second Reaping and the rest of this gauntlet right here. Method, are you getting ready for the Triple King encounter?
Yeah, Sanguine management is just so important in this dungeon, especially because in this area here, there's really not that much room to kite, as you mentioned. So, and while having all these Guardians as well that have such a huge area of denial effect with this frontal cone, you just want to make sure that you have enough space as possible. And you do not want to drop the Sanguine in this like middle hallway at the door, as you see for Method and A, because if they walk back into the room, they're going to walk over the Sanguine. So it's very bad placement for the Sanguine. They have to wait until it disappears before they go back into the area. Right now, they have to stay in this hallway, and Nerf Club does not have his Bluntamdi's bargain available, and this Guardian is standing in the Sanguine. He's casting, so he's healing up a bunch.
Oh my
this just cost them so much time.
That is a huge misplay there. They used the bump from the ROP earlier and then just let the Guardian bathe in that Sanguini Christini for an extended period of time, and these Guardians have a ton of health already. Even though in this tyrannical environment, those are mini-boss style mobs. That's why you just often don't deal with them by themselves, and they usually survive through like halfway of this gauntlet or something. Just tons of health on those. Finally, they do manage to down this, so they lost just a bit of time here. Method EU already well working on their second round of Reaping, and on, of course, the King and Queen that have spawned on the side. So they're probably about 25% or so at this point in the gauntlet, but they do have still the extra death on the board.
Yeah, definitely. And then one thing to note here, when you pull the Queen and the King, you want to make sure that you're not wasting your damage on the Reaping, because the faster you kill the King and the Queen, the faster you're going to be get to the next trash bag here. So because if you don't kill off the King and the Queen, the next trash bag is not going to be active at all. And we've seen Abrakeydabra catch up a lot to Team D in the last run, because Team D was wasting way too much time dealing with the Reaping here. So Method U is slightly faster. They're going to be able to get the last trash bag activated a little bit earlier than Method and A here.
Yeah, Method EU 48% right now, working on Queen Patla, the final of this gauntlet area, and they'll be able to go right down to the construct, which of course they will be skipping at that point. Method NA following suit, keeping about the same percentage difference between the mobs that we saw in the previous part of the gauntlet right now. After this, I expect to see pretty much the same thing coming out of both teams. They're going to obviously stealth past the construct on the bridge and mass pull the room full of ooey gooey rich and chewies on top of the two constructs, and make sure to kite the constructs appropriately, not only out of the Sanguine but near the tombs. The real question will come after that. This kind of coveted skip that Method EU has talked to us about, where they will skip the 4th Reaping. That might be what they need to really get ahead of Method NA, but we'll have to wait for that, because first they have to deal not only with this room but Machimba as well.
Yeah, so we see, as you mentioned, the Shroud just come out, making sure they go past this construct, just because it's so inefficient to kill, and it's way too dangerous to pull on top of the next room here, just because of the beam that this construct is doing, which can't really be line of sighted or out range, because it has a huge range. And now we see both Method EU and NA just gather these mobs together, and probably also going to pull the constructs on either side. Now they just have to be careful that they don't engage the constructs at the same time, because else, if you do that, then they will overlap their Entomb cast, and then you won't be able to get a player out for a pretty long time.
Yeah, for a pretty long time. Yeah, there's kind of like an internal cooldown, essentially, on activating or triggering the tomb on the side should two players get put in the same one, or until you can click it again should a second player get put in even just a second later. So they're doing well to desynchronize them here as they kill off the GUIs quite perfectly, making sure that all of the Sanguine is localized in one corner. They don't pull Machimba, who has a fairly large aggro radius here, and they're now just bouncing between these two constructs. Method EU doing the exact same things, but it looks like they actually mismanaged some of their GUI kills with the fluids on the side, and they're at about 50 to 60% health right now, so they still have to cleave those plus the two constructs down.
Yeah, and they have to be careful here, because they have to kill off both of those constructs at the very same time, because if you kill one too early, then that one will already proc your 60% Reaping Wave. So Method EU actually did it wrong. They're still in combat with some of those fluids here. So yeah. Zella did not manage to get out of combat, but he's still healthy on mana. The only issue is going to be that they didn't get a pot off out of combat, so it's going to cost them a little bit of damage. Either they shadow melt, or they manage to get a pot off, else they're just going to have to use one in combat, meaning they're going to lose a little bit of time. But Method NA definitely played this whole room a little bit cleaner, as they killed everything at the exact same time, got their Reaping Wave, got out of combat, and got their pot off.
Played it a bit cleaner is an understatement. They actually played it perfectly. Everything done at the exact same time, and they pulled the 3rd round of Reaping into Machimba here. Something that Method EU, you could see it, they hesitated. They're like, well, we usually spawn the 3rd Reaping here. Do we just, it's spawned now. Do we pull it into the boss? But the problem is they had those GUIs left over, so it was actually quite dangerous. If those died under Machimba by accident, with Machimba having so many casts as he does, with the fire denial on the ground, the drain fluid on a random target that needs to be healed above 90%, that could have healed the boss up quite a bit, who was already behind by 12% versus Method NA right now. So Method NA looking really good in this dungeon. A lot of pressure is going to be placed on what Method EU does next with that 80% skip.
Yeah, definitely. This 80% skip that they've been talking to us about has to be the one thing that puts them back into this dungeon, because if it's not going to save them a lot of time, then Method NA is ahead at this point. And if they get the second win here as well, then it's going to give them so much momentum. It is a best of 5 series, right? So they have to win 3 and not just 2 games. But if you're 2-0 behind, it's just going to cause so much trouble with your mentality too, because you have to win 3 games in a row. So Method EU definitely has to shape up if they want to win the second game here on King's Rest.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of work you have to do for a reverse sweep in a best of 5. So hopefully for them it doesn't come to that, but I'm sure Method NA would love nothing more than just to finish this nice and quickly and stick it right back to Method EU after all the difficulties they've given them during the cup play. Machimba the Embalmer running over for Method EU on the very, very far side, as now leaps over to the completely opposite side to get Jinji, who has unfortunately been trapped in that tomb. Finally gets a breath of fresh air, and they re-engage on Machimba. So a bit of damage lost there, unfortunately, because they had spent so much time not only getting Jinji out of that tomb, but the boss was on the completely opposite side, so they had to wait for him to travel back, which allowed Method NA to sneak 1 or 2% extra above Method EU here. And of course, they will be finishing the boss off very soon.
Yeah, and both of the teams chose to not use their Bloodlust here, so they will have it available for the trash later on, which we've seen most of the teams use for the next trash pull, because it's such a dangerous pull. You pull 2 groups on top of each other. You have Double Berserker, you have a bunch of casters, and you have Raptors jumping around. So you definitely want to be careful with this pull that we're going to see soon from Method NA. And they also want to make sure to deal with the Sanguine properly, because we have seen Berserkers heal, we have seen Raptors jump into Sanguine before from Abrakeydabra side. So let's see what what they're doing here.
Let's see indeed in a moment here as Method and A gets ready. Nerf Clap wants to split these two mobs perfectly with a Hex Priest and reflect their bolts right back in their faces. Goes right down the center, grabs both Berserkers, grabs the two Raptors on the side. We do have the Paralyze go off from Lighty, making sure that that Beastmaster in the back does not follow the group and get any of that Poison Nova on the group, or of course any of the punt. Inside, we have the Ursul's Vortex as the mobs stay in there, making sure that the Berserkers don't leap out right now. Nerf Clap gets his first stack of bleed for the Berserker, and here comes that shield wall nice and early as JB gets one of the Frost Shocks from the Witch Stalker right now. They start backpedaling the group out to make sure that they're out of Sanguine, and this is looking really good here, Nagura.
Yeah, definitely. Methadone doing such a good job. I don't think any of the mobs even healed at all from the Sanguine. They also, instead of killing the healing totem, they made sure it spawned further away, and then they just dragged the mobs away, so they didn't have to waste any time killing that healing totem. And now they're on to the Beastmaster plus the Brood. Once these two mobs die, they will proc their 80% Reaping Wave. And what the plan is going to be for Method EU is they want to kill off the Brood plus Beastmaster afterwards, and then they would just want to go to the Council boss, run through all the way through the trash and Shadow Melt off the Reaping Wave there. Now we'll see what Method and A does. Maybe they have the same idea, or maybe just play it the old way as they did in Cups.
We'll see exactly what they do here as they're at 77% trash on the board for both of these teams right now. Now making sure to point the Deadeye shot and have his back to the wall here. Brute and Beastmaster about to die at the exact same time here for Method and A. We'll see what they decide to do with it. Nerf Clap just charging right out of that, making sure he's not punted upwards. 83% on the board for Method and A as they start running towards the trash. I'm not sure if they're going to engage it or just run straight through, so it looks like they're doing a more traditional routing. They're engaging the next pack of 3 plus the Reaping that has spawned behind them for the 4th wave. So all eyes on Method EU right now as they're about to do the exact same thing. They're going to finish both of these mobs at the exact same time. No, they're not actually. The Beastmaster doesn't die right on time, but Method EU has finally finished it and indeed popped their speed potions and is looking to just get past this trash as quickly as possible and then Shadow Meld at the boss.
Yeah, so now we can really see if this strategy is really going to pay off for Method U, because they were behind right before this whole new strategy thing happened. So now their strategy is split up for Method and A, Method U, and now we'll see at the end if this is actually going to pay off, because they need to make up a couple of seconds, not only from being behind in general, but also because of the 5 seconds from the one death they had on the first boss.
You know, this is actually exactly what we saw in the previous series. Abrakeydabra did the exact same strat that Method EU is doing. They did this entire skip and the 4th Reaping Wave skip, so I guess somebody has done it. Method EU said nobody's done it before, but Abrakeydabra beats him to the chase, while Team D in the previous series is doing exactly what Method and A did. So we're having a really mirror situation between these two teams in King's Rest with two different strats post 80% Reaping Wave. Kula the Butcher here at 58% now for Method EU as they chew through the first of these 3 bosses. Now the difference with Abrakeydabra is they also kind of engage those 2 Berserkers one at a time, which was very dangerous, but they managed to pull it off. Method EU not doing that, playing it a lot cleaner, while Method and A finishing off the last Witch Doctor. 96% trash on the board. The remaining 4%, of course, will come from the Shadow of Zul. This is the rest of the trash that they're skipping and will not deal with for the rest of the dungeon.
Yeah, so Method U did get their first Axia on Azalea, which does do a lot of damage to Severing Axe. It's also a very long debuff. It lasts for 20 seconds. Now, the Dwarves in their team, which are the Rogues, can actually get rid of this debuff with their Racial. So unfortunately, Sally is getting the 3rd debuff as well. So hopefully he does have some defensives left, because if you don't have any defensive, this debuff might be very deadly. You can see him just drop very low, and he also needs to make sure to run around and not get hit by those whirling axes. And of course, while you're running around, you can't really heal that much, even if you are a Resto Druid. So, but he just barely managed to survive there.
And he's literally countering every take of the Sever Axe with a regrowth spam cast. Like, he's just sitting there, just tanking heals on himself. And we know he hates to do that because he wants to be in there getting as much damage on the boss as possible. Method and A now 44% on Kula the Butcher, has already completed all of the trash that they need to for the dungeon, except for, of course, the last Shadow of Zul mob right before King Dazar. So we'll have to see just how they handle that, but likely they'll just kill it and Shadow Meld the 5th wave off, as we see most teams do. 33% now for Kula, as Method has already started on the 2nd boss in this council encounter, Zanazal the Wise.
Yeah, Zanazal also doesn't have that many mechanics. You only want to make sure that you deal with the totems properly. The only very dangerous totem is the explosive totem. It works the same way as explosive, the affix. You want to make sure you kill it fast enough before the cast goes through. Else it does a huge amount of AoE damage to your team, but it shouldn't be a problem at all for those teams. And the other 2 totems don't really do that much if you have a full melee team, so they're just kind of ignoring it. As you can see, the Thunder totem just being there in the right corner, just kind of being ignored. And then the last boss, Akali, 3 also is not a huge deal, as it's really just a barrel through that can be avoided by a bunch of mechanics like Shadow Melt and Vanish, and then you have the backhand as well.
Spell Flood coming in from Nerf Clap there as Zenaz otherwise spawns for Method and A. Want to make sure to reflect that Lightning Bolt every 25 seconds, but every 25 seconds as often as possible, just to maximize damage on the boss. Here comes once again Kula the Butcher in the middle of the room. The bosses will cast their signature abilities coming back once they die, so it makes the encounter kind of get harder and harder and snowballs in difficulty to the very end. Method EU here finally downing the second boss, Zenaz otherwise, and using this downtime before Aka Ali spawns to kill the remaining totems and clear out the battlefield so that they have an easy time. But they left one in the corner, the Thundering Totem.
Yeah, so one thing to notice that Method you actually got the second set of totems before they managed to kill off Zanastal. Now, if Method and A manages to kill her before the second set of totems spawns, then you actually just gain a bunch of seconds, because there's one totem, the Earth Totem, that immediately puts a buff on the boss, absorbing damage. So you either have to finish off the totem to get rid of it, or you have to dispel it. But because there's no offensive dispel in either of these groups available to them, you just lose a bunch of damage if you get the second set of totems.
And they did manage to beat it by the looks of it. Method and A down. Zen is also a bit more advantage towards Method and A right now. Has had an absolutely flawless run so far. 0 deaths on the board, about to have their third battle res come up should they even need it. Aka Ali, of course, now has been aggroed. We know the story behind this boss. Barrel through will target one of the members. Everybody that soaks the charge in that path splits some of the damage, else the target will get one shot. But you can Vanish or Shadow Meld, what have you, the cast of Barrel Through right before it goes off, causing the boss to recast this very long cast time on someone else, which buys the time for the tank in turn to not get hit by debilitating backhand as often, and you just get so much extra DPS uptime on that. Method EU here, no stranger to that, as they get in the single digits of % on Aka Ali.
Yeah, Method is about to down the boss here, but again, they did this whole 80% Reaping Wave skip, so they still have to deal with some of the trash mobs, while Method and A only has to do the mini-boss, and then they can go to the last boss. So Method U is going to need a little bit of time to finish off this trash here, and again, Abrakeydabra just kind of had both of the Berserkers dealt with while they were fighting the boss, so they will have to deal with more trash mobs than we've seen Abrakeydabra deal with before. So we'll see how they do, and Abrakeydabra was struggling a lot with the Sanguine management, so let's see if Method U can do it a little bit better.
Yeah, Method U, I mean, this is a really dangerous pull here, and keep in mind that there's a pack on either side of them that they have not aggroed. They skipped the triple pull with the not only the Berserker, but the Witch Doctor and the Hex Priest as well right behind them. We saw Elsrad unfortunately get punted into that earlier, and he died instead of aggroing them. Now has 2 stacks of the bleed right now. Gingy Prox's Cheat Death is here as well. Things are getting a bit too spicy. He now actually has 3 stacks of the bleed. There's no way he can drop that. He's not a dwarf right now, and he has his shield wall popped. Finally manages to get spam healed, but unfortunately Prox's Cheat Death trinket that has literally saved his life on the last tick of the bleeds, and they try to finish up the rest of the trash, but Fragnan says 2 stacks as well. Prox's Cheat Death is going to be so much damage to heal through. He goes down, and Mears gets a Frost Shock from the Witch Doctor as well. Finally, the healing totem comes up from the said Witch Doctor, and they get the battle res up on Fragnan as they try to chisel down the rest of this group. So much damage coming in, though, as now just starts chunking again with bleeds all over the place, and there's area denial from the Raptor on the bridge as well.
No, they have to. There's some mobs in the back that they CC'd earlier. They had blinds and saps on some of the mobs here. You can see the Berserkers and the Headhunters coming in. They were supposed to succeed, and now since it's taking them so long, the CC broke in the back, and the mobs are just coming in, and now there's going to be even more mechanics to deal with for them. This is such a disaster pull for them. This is taking them way too long. You see now dropping very low. He's dying. Now actually goes down. They do have a Belarus available to them, but now everyone else is aggro, and this might just cause them to have a full team wipe, as there's Sanguine everywhere. You see one C actually coming out, so they only have the Raptor to deal with, and then they need to Shadow Mount to de-aggro everything, but this was disastrous for them.
Yeah, the disastrous. They finally managed to kill everything, but because now died, a lot of the bleeds from the Berserkers went on Fragrance, who had procced his Cheat Death earlier and needed to get res. He goes down again. Fortunately, they managed to drop aggro. There is a paralyzed mob in the back, but I don't think they're in combat with it anymore because they got the Master Res off on Fragrance. So finally, they managed to get out of that. Everything's sunshine and daisies here for Method and A, as by textbook example, have killed the Shadow of Zul, finished their 100%. We do know that it is an on-screen issue with the UI. They have indeed finished their 100% confirmed on Shadow of Zul, skipped the 5th Reaping Wave, and started on Dazar with 0 deaths on the board. Method, you now have 40% on Shadow of Zul. Fragments chunking down. Everybody's chunking down right now as Zayla struggles to heal the group.
Yeah, Method and A just having such a clean run compared to Method U. This is really not characteristic at all for Method U. They usually it's the other way around, right? But Method U having this new strategy where they skip the 80% reaping wave, they go backwards and just do the slight change to their strategy that they were making, is causing them so many issues. Maybe they didn't practice it enough. Maybe they figured we're gonna play King's Dress only one time. Maybe we just only do it a couple of times, but it's not working out for them at all as they're just pulling the boss right now. So they're very far behind to Method and A. Method and A is gonna get their Bloodlust up very, very soon in a couple of seconds, and they will use it once the boss gets to 60%, and then there's not much between them and winning the second game, and it's going to be 2-0. And they also still have 3 battle rests, so in case something goes wrong, as long as JV doesn't die, they can just get them back up too.
Yeah, I mean, this game is pretty much done at this point. Outside of a full wipe, they have 3 battle reses. Method EU has 5 deaths on the board, so the only way Method and A is losing this is via full wipe right now. The hardest part of the encounter is coming up right now as King Dazar is about to mount the second Raptor on the side, which redirects all damage to Tsala there, as you can see, but immediately Bloodlust and cooldowns are popped to make sure that they get through this phase as quickly as possible. The mount does, of course, AoE fear the group every 10 to 12 seconds. We can have the warrior tanks get out of it the first time with the Berserker's Rage, but after that, they will succumb to the fear. So Raban going down rapidly too. Not too much of a concern for the group as much as Tsala, which is now sub 10%, and they're about to finish it off. Unfortunately, the last Deathly Roar does get off, but it's nowhere near any of the tornadoes. So a bit of a bullet dodge there for Method and A as they've gone through the hardest phase in the encounter and are looking to start the third phase here.
Yeah, Method and A doing such a good job here in just King's Rest in general, just having Zero Death, such a good run by them. They're very fast as well if you look at their final time, doing such a good job, also avoiding all of those tornadoes. Well, on the other side, if you look at Method EU, you see a debuff on Gingy, you see a debuff on Maris. They're just really out of their game right now, as Maris might even die while he's feared and having this debuff doing such a huge amount of damage to him, also having both of those, both of the Raptors up at the very same time. And on Method EU side, they don't have a battle rest, so if anyone goes down, they're in trouble. But Method and A, again, just if you look at the boss percentage, it is a tyrannical setting, and this boss does have a lot of HP, so the 20% HP difference between those two teams means a lot.
Means quite a lot, and I mean, it's not even that. There's just so many factors opposed to Method EU right now. It looks like Method and A will be taking this here momentarily. They still have a few percentage shoot through for King Dazar, but I mean, you know, Gura, this strat, and I'm sure we'll talk about it at the desk, this strat that both Abrakeydabra tried and Method EU tried, it's just not a good strat. It just doesn't work out. That pull is too hard for both teams. They've shown it. It blew up in their face, and it really cost them the match on both sides, quite frankly. So, nonetheless, Method and A now here sub 10%, and they're looking to close out the second game, and they're going to be momentarily, I want to see the cheers from them in just a moment here as the lights come on, but they're momentarily going to be 1 game away. Here it comes. There it is. They're going to be 1 game away from claiming a 3-0 sweep against the indestructible Method EU and taking first place in the spring season here. 1 game away, Jack.
Into the storm where Method NA could be sealing the deal and finishing the sweep.
Here we go, Method and A versus Method EU. It could be the final match of this grand final here, but we do know how well Method EU's performed this dungeon. They've done it this tournament already, so if there's any map they could turn it around on, it's this one. Nerf Clap already taking a huge chunk of damage and has already procced his Cheat Death Trinket right off the bat. We're not even 30 seconds into the dungeon, so that's going to sting for later because there's going to be a lot of tank damage coming in, bursting stacks going left and right on both groups right now, but they do manage to stabilize as both tanks start kiting up the stairs. Shield all about to fade off now on the Method EU side, and kind of turning it more defensively. He goes up the stairs, making sure that none of those casts reach him.
Yeah, so we actually saw both of those teams play against each other in Shrine before. Now, Method and A had a huge wipe on the Tentacles later on, and that's why they lost, while Method EU had a clean run. But today, everything is looking like things are turned around. It's looking like Method and A is a super clean team, while Method EU is making all those mistakes. And you can see Cheat Death rocking from Gingy, and Frank's just going down, as I was saying. They're just having those small mistakes here and there, just the rogues dying, proccing their Cheat Deaths, and the pull is still not over. There's still things that can go wrong here.
And Gingy goes down as well. This is an absolute mess. Now goes down as well. It looks like it's going to be a full team wipe right now. Zayla is already running up the bridge. He's likely going to Shadow Melt to try and get the res off, even though they have the checkpoint at the beginning of the dungeon. But just to save the extra 5 seconds, the rest of the team has released, and Method EU already starting on the back foot here, while Method and A's only downside here was the cheat death proc trinket from Nerf Clap right now, the Bonsambi's bargain, but they have managed to stabilize and come right down, getting ready to proc their first round of Reaping and drag it into the most infamously well-designed boss Akusir that I, of course, had to hand it in this dungeon.
Yeah, this is such a huge disaster for Method EU. Just things are not working out for them at all right now, as Method and A procced the 20% Reaping wave already. They did Shadow Melt off as many Reaping mobs as they could, and now they're engaging the boss, which is not the best boss I've ever seen, by the way. It's kind of like meh. And Method and A is spotting the mobs at the same time with the boss, and now we've seen things go wrong here a lot. We've seen a rogue die to the bindings here from the caster. We've seen just cast go off in general. So we'll see how Method A is doing here.
I mean, I'd hate this boss too if I constantly got punted off the platform to Gura, but Akusir now at 85% for Method and A's. Method EU still struggling with that first pack. Now already chunked actually quite low on health again, but did manage to stabilize. He's trying to line of sight a lot of these casters here at the bottom as the last of the Spiritualist kind of congregates at the bottom. Actually, there might be 1 or 2 alive still, but this is just hugely sloppy for Method EU right now. It's already set them so far back in the dungeon, and Method and A already looking to have a nice, clean run. Exact same strategy, at least so far, based on what we saw the other day. But there's a couple of points in this dungeon, especially all the way up to Lord Stormsong Nagura, that if you wipe at any point, especially the later you go, and especially after the skip with the Guardian Elemental on the bridge, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen the differences between those two strategies from those teams the last time around, and it really looks like Method A has not adjusted their strategy, even though it seemed like they were slightly slower than Method EU the last time around. But of course, because of their huge wipe they had the last time they played against each other, we don't really know who had the better strategy or the faster one. So Method and A this time around, they just want to play cleanly. They just don't want to make the same mistake again and have this full team wipe going in, because again, Shrine is just one of those dungeons you always spawn at the entrance unless you're at the very, very last end bit of the dungeon. And if you spawn at the entrance and you've skipped all of those Reaping waves, Shadow Melted them off, then you will have to deal with them again and you have to re-kill all of those waves. So it's an insane amount of time that you lose if you have a full team wipe coming in.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. And just so many things can go wrong after this. JB's already run downstairs while Method and A's cleaning up the rest of the transition phase with the Aqualings just to pull the 4 initiates at the bottom, surrounding Heldis, the mini-boss that they, of course, will be skipping after this boss keels over and dies. They also just want to get rid of these 4 bursting stacks early when there's not really too much happening after the transition phase. Method EU still dancing around at the top, or on the stairs where they first started the dungeon, and finally has procced their first Reaping and popped their speed potions as well, running down to Lord Stormsong's area and shadow melding that first Reaping wave off. Not Lord Stormsong, excuse me, Akusir's area.
Don't even remember your own boss's name. So Method EU, so the difference in the strategy from Method EU to Method A here at the very first bit is that Method EU is actually doing 2 pulls upstairs before they go down and engaging this trash group here with the boss. So in the end, they will have a little bit more percentage, and that means that this pull that Method A is doing right now is a little bit bigger than the one that Method EU is doing later. So they can save a little bit of time later after this boss fight, and Method A has to deal with all of this trash. But the last time, it worked just fine for Method A. I mean, it took them a little bit longer, but they didn't really have any problems finishing this trash off. Now, one thing to note as well, of course, that it is bursting, and there's a couple of mobs that don't have a lot of HP, so you definitely want to be careful with your damage management, as Yoda actually procs his cheat death.
Yeah, damage management. This is a very tight hallway here. Water blasts are hugely dangerous to the tank right now. And not just that, but the Iron Hull Apprentices actually have a huge air denial. You can see right there, they did manage to AoE stun them. That just hits for so much damage. And of course, you have Tempest cast going off left and right. You have a limited amount of interrupts that you could do on these mobs, and you have to pick your battles, not to mention wash away small blue swirlies on the ground that punt you away from their center and deal a bunch of damage too. So we had Yoda get clipped there, unfortunately, and proc his cheat death. Won't have that available again for 6 minutes. And not that there's necessarily too much incoming damage on the rest of the party. I mean, there are things you can avoid later on. It's just the sheer presence of bursting that you want to have the safety net on all of these tunes. You want to have those cheat deaths present on the rogues in case things get out of hand. It's just a nice comfort to have, and Yoda's not going to have that for a while now. Here comes the infamous bridge skip right now, along with the second round of Reaping. Nerf Clap grabs everything, and they run off to the side and immediately shadow meld perfectly, getting rid of mostly everything, but we do know some of those Risen Souls sometimes leak into Gura.
Yeah, well done by Method A. Only got like 1 or 2 Risen 1,000 souls here back then, which is not going to be a problem at all. Now, the Trinket is coming back up for nerf, which is really good because this trash pool here is very dangerous. A lot of tank damage. You have a lot of casters here coming through with the water blast, as you can see them cast in the corner. And then you have a lot of tornadoes as well with tempests that you need to dodge. And, of course, you have the bursting when you kill them off. So you want to be careful here as you see JB interrupting one of these whirling slams. Now, of course, the whirling slams can be interrupted, or you can just walk out and dodge them. But if you interrupt them and it doesn't go through, then your melee can just keep doing damage, and just so much more efficient to interrupt it as long as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen some cheeky play here with the bursting coming up towards the second boss, where they actually skip most of these initiates and then backtrack and pull them during the boss using the rune from Brother Ironhull that decreases damage taken by 70% while standing in it. And that's really the key to getting anywhere between 12 and 16 stacks of bursting, something that you obviously can't level unless you have heavy DR or some form of immunity. So here they go again, just like we saw the other day, straight into the boss encounter. They pull 8 of the initiates. They'll get an 8th round of bursting stack here early on the boss with all their cooldowns active, and afterwards they'll pull another 12 to 16 of them.
Yeah, on the other side, we see Method U finally down the first boss, but they're so far behind. They do have a little bit less trash to kill here, as I mentioned earlier, because they have the 36% trash in comparison to the 28, I believe, that Method NA had. So they have a little bit less trash to kill and a little bit less time to catch up to Method NA, but still, the huge wipe that they had cost them so much time on top of the 4 deaths, which is a 20 seconds difference as well. While Method NA is already fighting Guild Caller Faye here, which can be a difficult of a boss fight, but we see those teams usually just not interrupt the Tempest cast to make sure there's no tornadoes spawning throughout the room. It makes it so much more difficult for those teams with a full melee setup to do this boss if there's a bunch of tornadoes just going around in the room.
Yeah, there's a bit of a miscommunication there as well. They didn't interrupt a couple of the slicing blasts, as you mentioned earlier, to not get too many stacks, but then they used the rune to clean the stack off, as you can see, all of them on Method NA side. We'll head in there. JB unfortunately gets hit by the frontal, though, from Brother Ironheart. Last thing you need to see. Fortunately, does not die, but what happened is the bosses themselves also gained a 70% damage reduction while standing in that rune, so they kind of just let Guild Caller Faye sit in there and do nothing for a while and lost a fair bit of damage on us. So a bit of a slip up from them as the 4th stack comes in. They want to make sure to interrupt the 5th, otherwise that would one-shot them. It does increase your damage taken from all nature sources per stack with that debuff. Method EU has done their skip perfectly across the bridge and is dealing with a lot of the trash in front of these 2 bosses that Method NA is on their way to downing at this point.
I really like that they pulled the Enforcer already. You can see there's an Enforcer that patrols around in the trash right after this boss, and it can only be pulled at a very specific time when it's in between 2 trash packs patrolling right there, because if you pull it while it's too close to another trash pack, that one will just social aggro. So the last time when Method EU played against Method NA, their Enforcer got pulled really late because they probably didn't have the timing right. Oh, they have 11 stacks. I hope Nerfclub is fine as he jumps into this zone. It's very late. Yoda just going down. They do have a battle rest available to get him back up though, but Nerfclub just almost going down as well here as he jumped into the zone at the very last millisecond.
Yeah, but I mean, that zone on Sabi, it's still only a 70% damage reduction against like 12 bursting stacks, and they kind of they refreshed their bursting a bit too late. They mistimed the rune versus the bursting death versus when to get in. So what happened is not only did Yoda go down, but then Shaqib procced his cheat death as well. So a bit of sloppiness out of Method NA here, and they did have to commit their battle res, which they will have another one available up in about 10 seconds here. So they'll have a bit of safety net later on. Method EU has wasted no time and has gone right up to the same boss here. 54% trash on the board for them. We do know they're going to make up some of that percentage throughout the boss fight as well, but they're still a fair bit behind, even with that small hiccup from Method NA.
Yeah, Method NA already procced the 60% Reaping Wave with their Enforcer that I've been mentioning earlier. This time around, they actually cleaned up their strategy a little bit and had the Enforcer be pulled in earlier, not wasting too much time once Brother Ironhull actually was dead. And now they Shadow Melted off the Reaping Wave plus the trash that they aggroed while walking through. And now this is the trash group. They actually died through the last time around. So we will see if they actually cleaned up their play this time, because if they have a full team wipe again, then it's going to cost them a couple of minutes to even come back to this point.
It's leaving you speechless what happens if they wipe again, because I don't even want to know. It's going to be quite disastrous. So hopefully for their sake that doesn't happen here again, as they do well to dodge the mental assaults. Now, trick here is that Nerf Clap needs to be in melee range of these Colossal Tentacles. Otherwise, they will start smacking not only the melee, but if no one's in range, and then they'll do a huge Hull Breaker cast that hits the group quite hard, especially in this fortified environment. A lot of damage coming in on Nerf Clap. There needs to be some form of interrupts on some of these Void Bolts going out, and especially the Rip Mine. The Rip Mine cast is hugely damaging dangerous for the tank, and Nerfclap just cannot get healed back above 40% health. JB doing what he can to focus him down and just get that healing up, and finally managed to do so as some of those drowning casts go out on the rogues, which is quite fortunate for them because they managed to cloak it off. But huge damage coming in on Nerfclap, finally managed to heal everything through, and the last few cultists are going down, but Nerfclap has committed his cheat death trinket to that.
Lighty going down as he got hit by one ability, and we see the two bursting stacks on everybody. They do have one battle rest available to them to get him back up. But this insane, crazy pull that they're doing, where they're pulling both of the bridge patrols on top of the tentacles. They only in-capped one of the mobs. I do believe they don't actually need this mob, and then they're going to shut him out off the aggro of it and just deal with the tentacles. So this is actually a very nice strategy of Method and A if it works out, as we can see it working out right now. Last time around, it did not work out, but this time they're doing it well done with only one death. So at this point, they're out of battle rested, so they have to play perfectly from now on. But they're so far ahead. Method, you just now proc their 60% reaping wave. They are doing the same skip and are going to shut him out off the aggro. But Method and A, they're on their way to the third boss here.
Yeah, they're on their way to the third boss, and I mean, you know, it worked out for them, but certainly not perfectly. They had to commit their only battle rest to that. They lost some damage on it from the form of Lighty, but again, I mean, anything's better than a full wipe at this point, because until they kill the next boss, Lord Stormsong, which they're about to do in just a moment, here comes the Shadow Meld right now. Sometimes you do have one of these Risen Souls snap to you on this fourth wave, but not a big deal, as Lord Stormsong finally does spawn and finish his RP. Once he's dead, this room will become the new checkpoint, so a wipe, although catastrophic, won't be nearly as catastrophic as starting all the way at the beginning of the dungeon. Method are you doing anything they can to catch up, and they've done an equally aggressive pull with all of the trash on the bridge, including the double tentacles.
I just heard Method and A cheer a little bit in the background, because the first Ancient Mindbender actually went on a rogue when they had the cloak up, meaning that the whole Mindbender just gets removed and no one is getting mind controlled at all. So they won the RNG battle on the first Mindbender. Now, if the second one goes on JB, then they just won the whole lottery. Well, Method U is still fighting the bridge trash here. They still have to deal with this whole trash pack, and then they can move on to the dwellers, and then they're moving on to the boss. Well, Method and A is already on 50%.
Yeah, Method EU certainly actually moving a bit slower on the bridge too. I do believe Method and A had the better strategy here. They pulled this trash on top of the tentacles. Method EU pulled only one pack on top of the double tentacles, so most of the bridge, not quite all of it, but they're finishing that up right now, as Method and A is still at, is at 35% on Lord Stormsong, making sure that some of those void bolts are reflected by Nerfclap as often as possible.
Oh, unfortunately, Lighty got hit by the Ancient Mindbender, so it is a damage dealer that has to go into those bubbles that damage him, because once he reaches 50% HP, then he will actually get freed from the Mindbender and he can continue to do damage. But again, just a 45 setting, so the boss really is not going to be a big deal at all, and the HP, of course, is a lot lower than on a tyrannical setting as well. But it's the last boss room that's going to be very interesting to see, because not only do they need a lot of damage to make sure they don't get a second phase on the boss, but it's also very important that JB does no mistakes whatsoever, because he's going to have the debuff on him that not only increases his damage done, but it also decreases. Oh my god, we see a cheat death from Yoda because he jumped into water too early.
The Method of you did that exact same thing the other day. They're just a bit too overzealous and they jump in too early, so much damage coming in. So no cheat death available again for him for the rest of the dungeon now, pretty much. And also they don't have the cheat death available because of the sloppy play. So if anybody dies, they're not going to be able to be rezzed on this next encounter. And we have certainly seen some people flop over on the final boss of the Shrine of the Storm here. Method EU still at 70% on Lord Stormsong. Still have the same 4 deaths that they had on the board from the beginning of the dungeon. Doing anything they can to catch up right now, but there's only so much you can do in the single target damage encounter. And from here on out, there's really no creativity in terms of strats. It's all been pretty laid out. At some point, you're going to pull 1 to 2 pack of eels. You're going to kill the rest of the trash in front of the boss using the boss's buff during transition. And then you're going to lust and finish off the boss all in one go, and then the eels after that. So anything short of a wipe should actually see Method and A with a 3-0 victory.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that they're actually pulling the eels on top of the boss. This is very dangerous, because you can see Nerfclap having so many bleed stacks on top of it, which is magic damage. So Proud Warriors are known to be very tanky against physical damage, maybe not that much against magic damage, so very well done by them. Now, one thing to note that these eels don't actually proc bursting, so they don't have to worry about that affix, but they did manage to finish them off. Now, unfortunately, Method and A does not know that they're this far ahead at this point, so they can't really play safer. They're just going to continue continue to do their strategy, even if it's risky. And again, they don't have any cheat deaths available, they don't have battle rests available, so if anything goes wrong here, it's a full team wipe, and Method EU can still catch up. So right now they're in the transition phase, and they are dealing with the different denizens.
Yeah, we can see JB, of course, at 9 stacks of that buff, getting as much damage as he can out. And after this, they will deal with the trash version of the denizens right in front of the boss, and then commit that Bloodlust to make sure that they one-phase the rest of the encounter. Method EO is downed, of course, Lord Stormsong, and is desperately swimming over to start this room themselves. But yeah, I mean, that EO pull we actually don't typically see from teams. That was a very aggressive pull. I'm glad it worked out for them, but it's very scary too, especially in a situation where you don't have any battle reses too. So very ballsy of them, but it worked out as they make sure to coordinate the 2 interrupts per Forgotten Denizen here so that the cast don't go out, not only dealing a substantial amount of shadow damage and definitely one-shotting JB. They're actually pulling the eels on top of these right now, so they're going as aggressive as possible, just wanting to cleave everything down and use JB's ability to do some extra damage here, just make sure they don't miss the interrupts, but it looks like they're going to pull this off.
Yeah, they want to make sure that GB does not get aggro from any of those mobs, because he does have the reduced HP, so as soon as he gets aggro, he might just get one-shot by one of those denizens. Now, one thing to note as well is that the bursting does do percentage HP damage, so he's not going to get one-shot by it or anything, because of course his HP is reduced, and he doesn't have like... his full HP is not reduced to 1 HP or something. He just has his max HP reduced. And now we see the Bloodlust being popped. Want to make sure that they face this boss right now before they get a second transition phase, because that's going to cost them so much time.
So much time here, but Volzith rapidly declining in health right now. They have just 1 eel CC'd on the side, and Volzith sub 20%. Just burning him down as desperate as possible. JB doing as much damage as he can, wants to close this out, does not want to give any chance to Method EDU to catch up right now, and they head over to the last deal. They're going to cleave them both down together, and Method NA are going to close this out with a 3-0 win in just a moment here over Method EU. They've done the impossible. They've downed the undefeatable team, and they've claimed victory for the spring season of the MDI in Sydney, Australia.
It didn't happen in Cup 1, 2, 3, but it happened on land. Method and A are our spring final champions here as they down Method EU, who has only ever lost 1 series, which was this one.